Sup, my fellas. Don't forget to leave feedback and enjoy the story. A judge is being sworn at and called by someone. A young boy gripes about having to perform community service. Korea has terrible laws. He shouts at the judge, claiming he is only acting in this way because he lacks a mother. He is required to perform 200 hours of community service because he robbed a jewelry store. He picks up a chair and shouts that they ought to put in those hours on their own. While asking the judge what happened, the police burst into the room. The judge is questioned about his well-being, but he chooses not to respond. The boy's parents appear frightened as the judge giggles. He informs them that this is the first instance of this he has seen in 15 years of handling juvenile cases. Yoon's son is instructed to pick up the chair after he removes his glasses. Yoon's son gives him the middle finger in response. His guardian is shocked at how messy he appears. Without the need for reformation, the defendant Lee Yoon's son will be sentenced under juvenile law, and he is aware that this will be seen as a slight against the legal system. A bus arrives at a facility for young offenders. The bus stops, and an officer motions for the prisoners to disembark. Yoon's son looks up at all the inmates that have gathered in the area where the results of laws gather. They look at them while at altitude. He casts a quick glance over and sees Yongshin, also known as the Yongshin Detention School, which is a school for information and communication. They are instructed to avoid making eye contact and to move quickly by an officer. All of the juvenile offenders present here have committed crimes such as fraud, theft, and assault. He calls Lee Yoon's son's name and inquires as to whether he attended Sing and middle school, while he believes that someone appears to recognize him. When the police tell Jun to back off, Jun simply tells them to go because he missed him. Jun tells him that he hasn't seen him in a while and is surprised to see him in this place. After the roll call, he instructs him to go to Ward B with a wink. He assures him that he will see him before being led away. A policeman queries whether he is Jun's friend. He warns him to be cautious because he is here to engage in a hot assault and blackmail. He accuses Jun of being him if he is his friend. He asks if he is Yoon's son after slamming some papers onto his head. If he is the same person who caused the commotion at the court, Lee Guak-yeon queries. He wonders why he did it and why he was in such a rush to get here. He calls his name, wraps an arm around him, and says he hopes they can coexist in peace because they will likely see each other frequently. He has to manage them because he is the correctional officer. But Yoon's son interrupts him and begins speaking to him. When asked if he knows Yoon's son by one of the prisoners, Ji-hoon replies, "Of course." When he tells his friend that he was well known in middle school, the friend is taken aback. He inquires about his claim to fame after learning that Jun's school was well known for its criminals. Ji-hoon turns to face him and begins to lick his lips. He claims that he was well known for being a loser to his friend. Yoon's son receives a slap from him and he tells him that it is good to see him, especially here. He looks furious as he holds his face and says her face. He continues to tap while saying the words aloud. He asks if he forgot as he grabs his hair. He wants to know if he believes that coming to Ju 6 and making a mistake has changed him. He grinned and told him that it brought back good memories, and that they used to have a lot of fun. He still recalls his unsuccessful attempt to break free in the school bathroom. He chuckles and explains that he was being overly dramatic, and that's why he was accused of school violence. He addresses him by name, holds his hair, and requests the display of his sword. He is aware that he arrived here as a result of missing both him and Young-sun in the past when Jun unzipped his pants. He gives him a lifeless stare before closing his eyes quietly. Jun is shocked when he then admits that he is correct. Ji-hoon appears perplexed as Young-sun grabs his head. He displays his tongue while admonishing him that he is correct, and that he has come to see him. He gives Young-hoon a kiss as she just stares at him. The other officers thank Wak-hyun for covering their shifts back at the juvenile office, and he advises them to make it home safely today. They don't understand why he is being so kind, and he begins to perspire. He extends his gratitude to Yeon-sung, who was conversing with him as they were just entering the prison. He looks terrified as Yoo-sun asks him if he used the statutory R word. He makes a startling turn to look at Yeon-sung, who was just turning around. In response to his perplexed query, Young-sun explains that he used an app to meet a minor on March 6th at 1 a.m. He attempted to do something in the car and tricked her into thinking it was a bed and breakfast. Yeon-sung reports that his license plate is $44.39. He wants to continue, but Gwak-hyun interrupts him, yelling and asking who he is while wearing a terrified expression. He inquires as to his purpose for being here, and he replies that he is looking for someone. He attempts to bite Jong-hoon's tongue off as the latter sobs in agony and he searches for a couple of kids. He screams loudly and refers to Yon-sung as a bastard for kneeing him in the face. He continues to kneel him while holding his head in a variety of positions. He responds favorably to those who destroyed his life and who also enjoy legal protection. The other prisoners call them a crazy bastard as they stare at him. While Yon-sung extends his legs and locks him with them, they yell and call them short. He expresses gratitude to his guardian, who had pleaded with him not to do it, and to apologize to the judge while continuing to fight. The defendant had already been sent to juvie. The judge had informed him, and it was too late. Upon hearing that, Yon-sung got down on his knees in front of the judge, who was genuinely perplexed and questioned what he was thinking. Yon-sung simply maintained a serious expression while lowering his head. The prisoner was spinning when Yon-sung threw him away. The correctional officer receives a plank to the back of his head after the others start screaming for him while fleeing. John hits him while calling him a for coming at him so quickly and calling him a filthy bastard. He asks if he trained somewhere while hitting, and as he prepares to hit him again, he takes a punch to the stomach. With superhuman speed, Yon-sung begins jabbing him, but John just takes the blows. He grabs him by the jacket, lifts his foot up, and tries to pull him into the ground. The situation has John perplexed, and Yon-sung has his leg in a leg lock. He firmly grasps his foot and twists it. Yon-sung inquires about his desire to know whether he was trained as John continues to scream. He questions the need for training for them and adds that he learned how to fight from a very well-known person. Yon-sung just broke his foot while John wonders if it's a pro. For a brief moment, there is silence. John simply displays shock while Yon-sung displays focus. He shouts so loudly that the entire structure can hear him. He asks how he could use a heel hook on a real person as he rides and screams on the ground. While Yon-sung grabs his other foot, he curses at him. He strikes into yet another heel hook position, leaving John speechless and crying. He inquires as to what he is doing, but Yon-sung cuts him off. He claims that by pulling on his foot, he learned how to fight. In addition to yelling at him to stop, he also expresses regret for what he did and blames himself for everything. He regrets making him a loner, humiliating him and abusing his family. He begs him and screams that if he breaks both of his legs, he will never be able to walk again. He apologizes once more as the prison guard approaches them. He calls out to him, but when his mentor asks why he wants to learn how to fight, Yon-sung responds with gratitude. At the time, he explained to his teacher that it was because the laws in Korea were terrible. He desired exact personal retribution. The officer, who is holding John's foot, tries to stop them while appearing terrified. "Whom should I exact revenge on?" the teacher asks. While Yon-sung pulled on John's foot and grinned while doing so, Joan screamed uncontrollably. He informed his mentor that it was a person he knew, and he now understands that these awful laws are to blame. With over 21,948 cases per year, assault crimes are the most common crime committed by young people. The most prevalent assault crime right now is destruction, and young people's increased curiosity is the main cause of these crimes. John was foaming at the mouth while screaming. He apologized to Yon-sung a million times, but he was ignored and his foot was tightened. When Yon-sung refuses to stop, the guard approaches them and inquires as to his condition. Despite his desire to continue, Yon-sung releases John's legs and slowly rises to his feet. He asks if he can tell him a joke while grinning and blood is dripping from his mouth. He had earlier told him that he had come to exact revenge. He smiles menacingly. The things that he did don't even come close to what the others did to him. The person he wanted to exact revenge on wasn't even Han John. An inmate explains what happened to the person with the flower tattoo. He is holding two other prisoners like bells and asks if he is Lee Yon-sung before adding that the person is completely insane and even knew Han John. The person is called Park Sang-kyul, and Yon-sung went to meet him to exact revenge on him. He asks for the truth because he almost doesn't believe what he heard. He is out on the streets while using his phone to view a Coca-Cola experiment. It looks really cool to a younger Sang-kyul who wants to try it out later. He grinned and asked if he could try to distinguish between a drink and pee. Yon-sung gives the cups a spooky glance before picking up both of them when asked once more if he would not be able to tell the difference. Park Sang-kyul was a mad scientist. In comparison to most people, his level of curiosity was unusual. It appeared almost as though he was constantly thirsty and curious about everything. He approached Yon-sung and inquired about the effects of consuming a laxative and an anti-diarrheal at the same time. Yon-sung appeared to be in fear. Because of this, Sang-kyul required a person to convey his curiosity. Sadly, that person was none other than Lee Yon-sung. He appeared shocked that his intestines actually stopped. When Yon-sung was carrying their luggage, Sang-kyul asked if anyone else was at his house. Despite his attempts to lie, Sang-kyul managed to catch him. His entire family left the house and made the decision to hang out and relax at his house. Yeon-sung requested that they set down the vase they had just picked up. Not long after, Sang-kyul called him over. Yeon-sung was under stress as they were destroying his home. He asked if he was all right and if he had a fever while holding his hand over his head. He inquires as to whether he has a cold because he had been perspiring earlier. He questioned his condition as Sang-kyul administers some cold medication. For a brief moment, Yeon-sung thought that he was finally treating him as a friend when he gave him the medication. Unaware of the side effects of the cold medicine, Yeon-sung is slowly closing his eyes as the other people laugh at him. Yeon-sung said that he felt like he was floating on water while taking the cold medicine. Even his monster-like friend amused him while he was high. Even though he was extremely pitiful at the time, he was incredibly happy and excited. He questions why Sang-kyul's neck is that way after being perplexed to see him in his dream. He grabs the towel in his hand after wondering what it is. He looks around to see if anything's spilled and then notices the microwave, wondering if he needs to put it in. Nothing happens for a short while. Then there is an explosion that completely destroys the house. Someone shouts to see if he is breathing. He is breathing too quickly, and someone else remarks that his pulse is dropping. Yeon-sung opens his eyes slowly to discover that he is in a hospital. As soon as he opens them, he notices that people are staring at him and asking if he is awake. They have inquiries about the towel and the microwave and are from the Suding police station. He can't even recall the question's exact formulation. He was certain that he wasn't being himself at that moment. He also had a nasty scar on his face, and his house was completely destroyed by fire. He hears a sudden call for him, and when he turns to look, Sang-kyul is waving at him. He remarks on how incredible the explosion was, and how it was larger than what he had previously seen on YouTube. He chuckles and claims that Yeon-sung attempted to extinguish the flames inside the book. He ought to be appreciative that he dragged him to the ground floor. When Yeon-sung ignores him, Sang-kyul calls out to him. He becomes irate and queers the issue with his face. He feels betrayed by Yeon-sung's lack of appreciation for saving his life. Yeon-sung is perplexed by the fact that Sang-kyul actually anticipates a thank you from him. You will be aware if you have been bullied. Bullying is most terrifying when you encounter someone with whom you can't seem to communicate. The sense of helplessness you experience when you're unsure of how to begin speaking, combined with the imagination of that fear. Most people simply gave up, and Yeon-sung did the same as he apologized to Sang-kyul. He returns home and informs his loved ones that he is alive. His grandmother and mother both look at him with tears in their eyes as he begins speaking to his mother. She reveals to him that he had earlier received a call from the police station, claiming responsibility for starting the house on fire. When he tries to deny it, his mother cuts him off by saying that all of his other friends told the agents that he was responsible. One of them claimed to have taken a pill, and another person who also confirmed it was him and wanted to leave both agreed. Sang-kyul acknowledges that it was indeed him, and even claims to have seen him. He was the one who started the blaze in the house. Sang-kyul is aware that because they are still 13 years old, they won't be punished. His mother queries what they ought to do given that they are no longer eligible for fire insurance and risk being accused of fraud. Their entire house is now damaged, and they even have to pay for the neighbors' losses. Now that we are in the present, Yeon-sung is moving through the corridors. Sang-kyul is unsure if Yeon-sung is the same person he remembers. The guard commands everyone to pay attention when the door unexpectedly opens. He explains that someone must temporarily stay in this room due to an incident that occurred not too long ago. Since he is new and you don't know him, they ought to give him a warm welcome. If he has any questions, he requests assistance from everyone. Someone asks him if he sold his ass to the warden or something, as they wonder why he had to change rooms. Before he can finish, he receives a kick to the face, which causes him to fly away. The towels are still being held up by Yeon-sung while everyone simply stares. They all take off running while yelling that they will beat him up. While Yeon-sung claims to have come here to meet a curious man, Sang-kyul merely observes from a position of anchor. Sang-kyul calls him and queries whether this is actually the same Yeon-sung from earlier. He sets the towels down, and as Sang-kyul smiles and prepares to speak, he is cut off. He is told by Yeon-sung that he can defeat a skilled kickboxer with just one finger, and is inquired as to whether he is aware of this. Yeon-sung observes that he hasn't changed his curiosity, and wonders why he would be saying that since it has been a long time since they last saw each other, he can control his curiosity. He grinned and assured him that he would let him know how to use just one finger to defeat a professional kickboxer. Someone has a tattoo of a burning person on their body. The tattoo artist informs Yeon-sung that the tattoo is finished and hands him a cleaning rack. She inquires as to the meaning of the tattoos while Yeon-sung is momentarily silent. After that, he says to her, "I don't want to forget. His grandmother is the one on fire." When Sang-kyul asks if he really means one finger, he is perplexed. If he understands and is aware that he wants to learn more, Yeon-sung inquires. Sang-kyul grinned and said he didn't understand it at all. Yeon-sung tells him he likes that sort of thing and asks him to think about it. Still not understanding, Sang-kyul appears to be. So Yeon-sung continues by removing an air freshener from the towels. He promises to demonstrate how to control a kickboxer. Then, as Sang-kyul is screaming in agony, he sprays the air freshener in his face. After Yeon-sung throws the can to the ground, he yells that it stings. He then kicks him in the balls with great force. The pain is so intense that it causes Sang-kyul to tense up throughout his entire face and body. He continues to yell and curse, and Yeon-sung simply observes him without showing any emotion. He holds his crotch and calls Yeon-sung names and swears. He starts to tell him that the area is off limits when Yeon-sung interrupts him and punches him in the face. He strikes him repeatedly and from various directions. Although Sang-kyul tries to deflect the blows, they are coming at him too quickly. Then Yeon-sung knees him in the stomach as if he were in the M, and after stepping on his foot with his heel. The fundamentals of combat state that if the opponent defends his upper body, you should aim for their lower body. Yeon-sung mocks him by complimenting his appearance. When Sang-kyul tries to uppercut him, Yeon-sung deflects the blow by reversing his body position. He continues to punch while cursing. He is sobbing and becomes irate that he is unable to open his eyes. While swinging, he gives himself a thank you for reminding him that even if he can only manage one hit, if he can buy himself some time to open his eyes, he still has a chance. He swings erratically and bangs into various objects in the cell before his fist gets caught in a towel. The moment Yeon-sung wraps the towel around his arm, Sang-kyul is left perplexed. He encircles it tightly and draws Sang-kyul close. Sang-kyul is able to open one eye, but Yeon-sung twists his arm and pins him to the ground. As Yeon-sung knees him in the face, Sang-kyul screams in agony as his shoulder is twisted. He then strikes the ground with his head, leaving Sang-kyul covered in blood. He inquires as to how it feels to be beaten with a freshly microwaved towel. Yeon-sung turns to face him and yells at him once more. While lying in a hospital bed, his grandmother was drooling and making odd noises. When his brother inquires about Grandma's health, the doctor responds that it is typical for people her age. He thinks she must have pretended to be okay in front of the family, because she must have been more shocked than they realized when her house caught fire. But she must have become upset upon seeing her grandson, particularly given the burn mark he had from the fire. Being in the same room together is bad for both of them. He advises her to have her sent to a sanitarium. As Sang-kyul lies defeated on the ground, Yeon-sung simply observes him. Then Sang-kyul expresses gratitude, shocking Yeon-sung. Ed, who is trembling on the ground, thanks him for allowing him to use the blood to clean his eyes. He then kicks Yeon-sung abruptly, causing him to fly back from the impact. Sang-kyul exclaims that he feels like while standing up and laughing. He confesses to him that his eyes nearly got him fucked. He inquires about the towel again and inquires as to whether he wishes to pass away. He then kicks him once more, but Yeon-sung manages to dodge. He continues to kick and queers whether he has forgotten that he is a kickboxer. He inquires as to whether he appeared to be so simple that he believed he could prevail. As he is pushed into a corner, the more he considers it, the more he feels like Yeon-sung is. He grinned menacingly as he said, "This brings me back," explaining that every time he had been beaten, he had made a bug-like ringing noise that he had found amusing. He warns him that he will beat him up even more severely than before, because he went too far by using that spray. Yeon-sung recalls how his teacher questioned him about where he would fight. He was told by Yeon-sung at the detention facility that the place has many rules, so he should be sure to blind him with the spray and lay down something like a blanket. When Sang-kyul sees the blankets, he is perplexed. He probably would not have realized until it was too late with just a little taunting. When Sang-kyul realized the blankets were on the floor, he started to fall, and Yeon-sung quickly tackled him to the ground. After flying back, Sang-kyul is raised in the air by Yeon-sung. In the past, Sang-kyul used to call Yeon-sung and record him while accusing him of starting the Donggo district fire in front of everyone. They recorded him on TikTok Live, and as a result, he experienced online bullying. They questioned him about his feelings following the fire he had started while under the influence of drugs. Sang-kyul waves his supporters off and promises that when they see each other again, they will talk about his grandma, who is in a coma as a result of him. They will seek out his grandmother and perform for them live. The shocking brutality of their actions astounded Yeon-sung. He slammed Sang-kyul into a wall as he reflected. In response to Sang-kyul's insults, he raises his fist. Yeon-sung raises his fist and gives him a glare before punching him in the face. Without showing any emotion, he raises his fist once more and strikes him repeatedly in the face. When Sang-kyul attempts to threaten Yeon-sung, he is unable to do so, and Yeon-sung grabs his pinky instead. He then looks at him with blood on his face and breaks his pinky. Sang-kyul writhes in agony and screams uncontrollably. While trying to shield his face from Yeon-sung's punches, Sang-kyul keeps yelling at him to stop. He expresses his regret several times, but Yeon-sung does not respond. While recording Yeon-sung and his grandmother as she crawled on the ground, Sang-kyul was grinning. Yeon-sung was trembling while his grandmother continued to make odd noises. Yeon-sung continues to punch Sang-kyul in the face while raising his fist. Even though Sang-kyul extends his hand to express regret, Yeon-sung just keeps talking. The beating didn't stop until the sun rose. He finally stops and turns to look at an unconscious Sang-kyul with a bloody full body lying on the ground. He asked Yeon-sung what he did that was so wrong, but he could hardly get his name out. He explains to him that when they were younger, they all played and made jokes. While calling his name, Yeon-sung grabs a number of clothespins and shoves them into his mouth. Then he says that even then, he had noticed that his mouth was always the problem. He instructs him to refrain from speaking in the future while keeping his mouth shut, explaining that only humans are capable of speaking. He recalls how Sang-kyul destroyed his life by punching him in the mouth, and how his mother was unable to even file a fire insurance claim. He raises his bloody fist and continues to strike him. He recalls all the occasions when he intimidated him and told Yeon-sung to stop shaking. When Yeon-sung closes his eyes, he is aware that some people might wonder why he left a piece of the past hanging for such a long time, and that everything would have faded away with time. Everybody does it, and Yeon-sung would tell everyone who believed it to goof off and take care of their own business. He learned to fight because he disliked the idea of living that way. So it's been 5 months now, but the Yongga temporary detention school, where protagonist kept strangling his rival, is taking him over. A man came up to our hero and protagonist asked him how things were going there. So we see that on the board, this guy is already writing that this is the 4th fainting episode of the day for this guy that our hero is strangling. He said that our hero has already been able to make this guy faint 898 times. Protagonist is looking at the board and knows that he has to press on for the 900th time before his opponent will faint. And the guy who already had veins on his face said that if our hero just wants to prolong the pleasure, which is just to strangle him and make him lose consciousness, then he should do something. But our hero asked him to just shut up and look where he told him to. At that very second, protagonist's roommate tells him that someone is coming. In fact, behind the bars was one of the guards, who was clearly not very happy that our hero, or rather his cell, was disturbing everyone's restlessness. It wasn't just the warden, but Officer Kim Jong-ok, who worked at the Yongga Detention Center. He couldn't understand why everyone was making those strange noises, so he went to each cell and asked who was making those noises. But when he went to the cell with the number 196, the cell's occupant himself answered that it was definitely not him. But 196 had the courage to tell the officer that he knew very well that it wasn't really him, and that the sounds were coming from cell 204. So 196 asked the officer why he simply could not say anything to our main character. Why does he remain silent all the time, while our hero remains without punishment? The officer turned on our hero with irritation, but immediately expressed his desire to go away, because he could not bear to be pressed by a criminal. He simply asked us not to make any more noise without saying anything to protagonist. He also said that all the guards were checking, so that they would not follow them later on the cameras. The officer approached his colleague as if he just lost his temper, because he could not understand why all of them should treat number 204 differently. Does it make any sense at all? But his colleague told him that they were doing it because the chief had asked them to do so. He was just begging him to save him, so they had no other choice. But even looking at it that way, the incident had gone too far. After all, anyway, our hero has less than 1 week left until the end of his term. So he simply asks his comrade to be patient. Our hero looks and understands that he will be able to leave the given place in 6 days already. So if he wants to start his future plan, he should start getting ready. But the words of protagonist that he wants to prepare may in fact mean too much and too different from what we can expect from him. Our hero is already standing outside and hears an announcement that all prisoners who have an appointment should hear. While the announcement is still being announced throughout the prison, we can see a beautiful lady with glasses, who is trying to walk right up to this place. He takes off his fancy glasses and says that she is hot. Walking down the street, many passersby can see her beauty, but the only thing she cares about is her boyfriend, Yun-xiang. But after thinking for a while that he's probably doing well, she calms down. We do not know who this woman is for Yun-xiang, but we can only understand that this is the real applicant for a visit to our hero. Our hero is already sitting in the meeting and is looking at his visitor with a surprised face, who, as we understood earlier, was the lady who was looking at protagonist with an even more strange face. He was looking at her and asked her to stop smiling as he felt very uncomfortable. This girl also said that it seems strange to her that protagonist's face does not beat up more often, because the most real and beautiful Nuna is looking at him. She also said that all this is strange because she is his kinswoman. So she simply said that he must smile more often to be like his sister. Our hero takes note of everything she said, but does not understand why she wore a suit to that meeting. Our protagonist immediately changes his mind and doesn't want to know anything anymore. So he says that he's almost done with Park Sang-chul because he's already half out of his mind. The pseudo-sister of our hero, who we will call Nuna, is praising our hero, saying that he's really smart. So she even wonders what it is like to feel the relief that one feels after being avenged. Protagonist is not pleased with this conversation, so he simply asks for information about the next guy. Our sister very sadly asks why she has to be so mean, but then she gives in and tells us that our hero's next target has moved to Can-am and lives there. Our protagonist asks if that means that his family might be rich. His sister also confirms all his speculations, so our hero still has one more question that he can't leave alone. He asks if the person he is now being tipped off about is the grandson of the head of the clinic. But at this moment, we are transported to the school where our hero's new target, Young-boom, is studying. We see that he is now having a conversation with his teacher, who tells him that his grades have improved for the second time. Young-boom says he is very grateful to her for such kind words. Many teachers who were sitting in the teacher's lounge said that Young-boom is the leader of her class and that he cares about his classmates and gets high grades. Everyone agreed with these words about this great student. So at the end of her conversation with the teacher, she tells him to give out the handouts that she will give to him and to bring their homework to the third grade. When Young-boom receives the printouts, he sees the ring on his teacher's hand. He asked what it was on her finger. After a pause, he was told that she had been proposed to quite recently. The same teacher told him that many students who had been eyeing her would now be shedding tears. The teacher laughed, but asked her not to make jokes about her because it would make her blush. But she did tell Young-boom that she was actually getting married. Young-boom pretended to be happy for his teacher, but the teacher said not to tell anyone because it's kind of a secret. When Young-boom came out of the room, he wondered to himself if his teacher was getting married. But as we can see, he wasn't just wondering about himself. He was actually licking his eyes and thinking that now his teacher will also be a married woman, so that he can do something bad. Now we can get to know this character better. His full name, Young-boom, is 18 years old, and he goes to a high school in Gangnam Ward. We're back to our protagonist and his sister. Nuna says that the only thing that makes him special is that he is a really good student. So in addition to good grades and winning all kinds of competitions, he is also a member of the student council. Our hero doesn't really care about all that, so he only asks what is his usual route from home to his school. As usual, Nuna is not very bright, so she tells him straight away in a clear and concise way. She says that Young-boom's usual route is just to school, the academy, the student cafe, and then home. She doesn't see anything to catch him in the act. She asks our hero if it is true that he is the person he told her about. Even after taking the boy's personal file, she could find nothing to find fault with. Our protagonist looks at Young-boom's photo and remembers the hard moments when many people in his class were pointing their phones at him and saying that he was the one responsible for that tragic fire at Dongho-do. He remembers that it was Young-boom standing next to that guy who was judging him and saying that our hero was the one who was. They thought everything that happened there was ridiculous. They even thought our hero was real. Our protagonist even remembered that Young-boom approached him and asked him if he really had a sister. And then he started asking tricky questions that of course had a bad context. He asked him if he had a sister, if she was a little sister. So tapping on the table, our hero was saying that he was sure that in fact it was who had ruined his life. He held his head up as if to say that he wanted everyone to understand that even though he was a model student to everyone including his sister would have to believe that he was far worse than they could ever imagine at first sight. Our hero has already begun to return to his side, or rather the camera, and toward him lined up many other poor souls, who immediately fell down and greeted our protagonist as if he was their boss. He went inside and asked where Park Sang-chul was. His cellmate told him that he had gone to the corner and had curled up there. He was also told that he had even skipped his lunch just sitting in that evil corner and that he had been like that for a long time. When he heard that Park Sang-chul missed his lunch, our hero decided to punish him. Sang-chul Park, on the other hand, heard our hero's voice, so he got worried and fell into another fright. Our protagonist again began to strangle him so that he would faint or just pass out. Park Sang-chul, on the other hand, cried and begged for mercy, but our hero was just as stubborn and held his ground. He broke his neck, saying that he had asked him many times to be quiet, because according to our hero, only people can be quiet. Park Sang-chul had already cried and asked him to stop. So we can see that after going through so many experiences as our protagonist, Park Sang-chul ended up with many health problems, more precisely speech disorders, frequent and sudden attacks of ataxia, concentration disorders, decreased brain activity, shoulder subluxation, and even PTSD, which is the result of repeated trauma. Our hero, however, understood that this was the list of illnesses he wanted to achieve so that Park Sang-chul could lose his former mind. Park Sang-chul was still trying to apologize to our hero, but had fallen back into unconsciousness. Our protagonist asked to bring a cloth and check how many times he was able to do that to Pan Sang-kol. Yes, after strangling his enemy 899 times, he thought only that prison only breaks those who just do not know what to do with themselves. But luckily, he just did not have that. He just turned to the inmates and said that Park Sang-chul didn't just pass out this time, but pissed his pants. Many people started to rush around the room and said that there was a really bad smell in the air. Only after our hero had finished his revenge, and after 6 days could he go outside and take a breath of fresh air, as if he was mocking his expectations. This might not have been enough for him while he was in prison, because only after the completion of more than 12 suffocations instead of the planned 1,000, he was able to meet his sister, who was waiting for him on the way out. He asked how long she had been waiting for him, and what would they do now? We understand that he called his sister Johanna, but she had asked him to call her Nuna. She picked him up and asked him if he was ready to run away from this place or not. But we see that our heroes are with a very ugly and fat woman who is wearing a lot of makeup. She put a little bit of her makeup on and was very pleased with how her makeup is literally put on by our hero. She asked Nuna where did she find such a cutie like our protagonist. After all, the first time in her 20 years of practice, she applied makeup with such pleasure. But Nuna says that if there had been 2 of them in the studio, she would have taken not 1 but 2. The woman appreciated Nuna's joke, so that all that could be heard from the van was laughter. When she finished laughing, she asked for the wig that Nuna was supposed to bring. Then we see that after a long makeup session, the woman said that it was time to see the result, because they not only changed our protagonist, but they also painted over the burn completely, and our protagonist turned into a real good-looking man. The woman now turned to our protagonist and said that if his sister took care of him, he also should do his best for her. Our hero had only said that he was ready to go back to his enemy, thinking of his revenge. Our hero is also looking at the result that he got. He thinks that it turned out quite well. But the woman who has praised our hero all the time asks Nuna if our protagonist has no manners because he does not even seem to appreciate the fact that the woman has helped him make his new appearance. Though she understands that our hero is not brought up, in spite of all this, she understands that this is not surprising, as most likely all teenagers of his age behave this way, and it is possible to say more that absolutely all of them. We see Young Boom's class who spends all his free time thinking about his teacher who is about to get married, so the mere thought of it drives him insane. He just can't sit still and wait. He had his phone in his hand, but he heard that a new student was coming to their school. Everyone was incredibly shocked because everyone who saw him thought he was incredibly handsome. No one believed it, so they wanted to see for themselves. But it seems that the teacher has already entered the classroom and he is getting ready to introduce our hero to the class. So the teacher asks our hero to sit at the vacant desk and asks to make friends with him, or rather try to make friends with him. Our protagonist is introduced to everyone by Lee Yun-seong. Many people looked at him disrespectfully, but all the girls in the class were just delighted with him. They couldn't understand what it was that many of them found in him because all he said was that he was really happy to meet him. The teacher himself thought that it was too short, but he didn't seem to care about that either, so he asked to sit in an empty seat once again. While our protagonist was going to his new place, many girls were watching him, and the teacher began a new conversation about that the trial exam is not far off, so that today he will be the one who will consult with them after the grade check. So he asks no one to take it too seriously and study hard in the first semester. Our protagonist stood over some student who looked just like a mole. He started spitting, trying to say something, but the only thing he got out of it was to say that our hero just... And basically his self-image was terrible. The whole class, or rather the male part of the class, was just choking back tears of laughter. The teacher left the classroom. So many of the most likely bullies in the class began to shout at the nerd that he did his part, which he was destined to do. They encouraged him to ask our hero once again why he had performed so badly. They wanted to ask him to hurry up, showing that it was not a request, but an order. But before he had finished his performance, our protagonist immediately knocked down the whole desk with his foot, right with the student. Many people jumped on him at once, but our hero very skillfully dealt with the offenders here as well. That very hooligan was sulking and warned our hero that he was about to die, and wanted to attack from behind. But our protagonist immediately managed to throw him over himself right on the floor. When he had finished with the hooligans, he stood over them and asked if it was true that his speech was too simple. If it was, he could introduce himself again. He said it one more time and asked if he had now introduced himself clearly. Next, we see Young-bum, who is once again carrying the homework sheets to his beloved teacher, who is about to get married. However, we see that the whole school started to talk about our protagonist who was able to beat everyone famous Park Soon-ho in his jar on the very first day. Many people didn't believe it and thought that our protagonist will be finished soon, because his school life will be turned upside down for sure. This conversation was just between Young-bum and a girl. The girl went on to say that this is the most important topic of conversation at their school right now. It was a really interesting thing that happened to the newcomer. The girl asked if Young-bum knew about it or something else. But Young-bum made it clear that he didn't want to hear anything about our protagonist. He just wasn't interested. He thought he was just another that came out of nowhere. The girl was really surprised because she couldn't understand how Young-bum could be so disinterested. She even thought that he was too mature for her, which is exactly what she likes. After he finished talking, he also asked for the printout that his teacher gave him, because girls shouldn't have to carry such heavy things. Then we can see our hero standing in front of a bunch of hooligans who definitely have some questions for him. They asked if he was the newcomers and if he had beaten up their younger colleagues, and if he was not an athlete. The whole thing was going on in the toilet, which was protected by two hooligans like him. They told everyone that it was occupied, so everyone should go piss somewhere else because the toilet is occupied. But as usual, none of the villains do not have time to say a word, because our hero immediately takes the door of the school toilet, hurting all standing behind her. Our hero begins to deal with everyone, just rushing and striking at the same time. Someone even starts yelling at our hero, calling him names. However, our protagonist immediately grabs this hooligan by the ear, which makes him scream in pain. This bully asks to let him go, but our protagonist is also unperturbed, and says that all the clothes of this bully are branded, so that he could conclude that this boy is a rich kid. After these words, our hero hit the bully in the face and said that if this is all so, then his parents give him a considerable sum for pocket expenses. So our protagonist is even a little jealous of him, because he would like to buy such a branded t-shirt too. At this moment, while our hero was hitting the little birds behind him, some big guy stood up. This big guy asked our protagonist who he was. The tough guy was the leader of their gang, Kim Sang-wook, who was 19 years old. He also said that he came here because he was curious to see that cretin who hurt his juniors. But after looking at the situation, and our hero as well, he realized that he was just a punk. But in the next frame, we can see that many school children passed by the toilet and asked to do something about the whole situation. Because our hero was able to put the big bully on the ground and start to hit him a lot, not allowing him to just stand up in any way. The girl asked Young-bum to call her teacher so that he could solve everything. But Young-bum showed his real personality. He incredibly liked what was happening right in front of him. He stood there with his mouth open and his eyes full of attention. The big man in his turn, who had already taken a not very proper look for a gang leader, shouted to our protagonist to stop because he just wanted to talk. Our hero didn't want to listen to anything, so he immediately kicked him in the face, which most likely knocked him out. Our protagonist turned to the door, where a large crowd of onlookers had gathered, unable to look away. Then we see the girl who was next to Young-bum shouting at him and asking where he went. He said he would take the printouts. The girl tried to guess the reason for Young-bum's behavior, but she could only guess that he probably left because of that very fight. But at that moment, Young-bum asked Yo-sol to lay down for a minute because he only left because he had something to think about. Young-bum's face immediately changed. He just stopped looking like himself. And then he asked his girlfriend if it's not going to happen if she goes to the teacher's room first. But although the girl said that nothing terrible would happen, but to say that she was in incredible shock, it is nothing to say. She couldn't even say the words properly. Our hero was going out of school, but he was stopped by the same hooligans who asked him to follow them, because there was someone who wanted to meet our protagonist. Our protagonist got nervous, but he could not understand who it could be. But we realized that the person who wanted to meet our protagonist was Young Boom, who was sitting on the roof waiting for our hero. He greeted our hero and even wanted to appear very polite. He even recognized our protagonist by saying that he was the one who beat up the older guys when he got there, and our hero is probably very good at fighting. So Young Boom started to touch him by the shoulders and ask him what about his studies. How could he prove himself there? Because he didn't say anything, Young Bam thought that he was too quiet, so he just cut to the chase and said he was a sponsor. He is the kind of sponsor who sponsors those kids who are good at fighting. So he immediately twisted his face and asked our hero how much money he wanted, or rather how much money he would sponsor him. Young Boom asked him not to be frightened and to tell him exactly how much money he wanted from his new sponsor. He also said that his family owns the building where they are now, and they have a couple of similar ones in Kanam. So he directly asked our protagonist if he would like an apartment in one of them. Our protagonist remembered that once when he was a child, when he could be offended, Young Bam had told him, or rather reminded him, that our hero's house had burnt down. So he even wondered where he really lived. If he was in a temporary shelter, then it must have been hard even for him. So based on that, Young Boom even offered money to a lot of people as a child. Our protagonist knew that the more he remembered that moment in his life, the more he wanted to meet that. Young Boom was about to say that he would let our protagonist think, but our hero told him that he probably didn't understand anything. Because our hero had come all the way there not because of money, but because he wanted to see Young Boom. Our hero thought a little. Isn't it about time to start the real show that everyone is gathered here for? So he says he is Yeon Seong at one point and asks if Young Boom remembers him because now the real revenge begins. Our protagonist knew that he would never be able to forget what he went through just because of him. So just because of that, our protagonist can't leave what he wants to kill him now several times stronger. He remembered all the times he could make fun of him. So he jumped up and asked our main person with a disgruntled expression whether he was really the loser he used to make fun of at school. With fright, he at once stretched out his hand to the face of our hero and lifted his bangs to check whether there was that scar on the face of our hero. But he could not see the burn mark that he hoped to see in his bangs. He asked our protagonist to wait as he was still in disarray, as it seemed that he was not him. Our protagonist tried to just stick to his plan and keep pushing on the Young Boom. He kept telling him that he was Lee Yan Xiong. That's when we realized that this is actually part of his plan because he started his show again. Our protagonist started to say that he was the same Lee Yan Xiong that they all made fun of during the live broadcasts on a very large website. He had the exact same name as him. Our guy only thought about executing the first part of his plan, or to be more precise, misleading Young Boom. We are shown moments when our hero was bullied, or rather filmed. They filmed our hero and told all their viewers about all the things our protagonist was able to do. They just wanted to reveal the very savagery that he had done. But they had some idea how they could make him suffer even more. They started apologizing to all the Lee Yan Seongs in Korea. They had heard that because of our protagonist's situation, many other guys with the same name were affected. But at the end of his speech, he said that it was not the guys who were to blame, but their parents who had given them the same name as our main hero, who was a common loser at the time. The entire chat room exploded with messages that in fact our hero was very strange, and the guys did everything right. Even though some people were talking about throwing the report on the stream, hooligans did not stop it. They just showed their middle finger to the camera, letting everyone know that they are the kings of the field, because they will just create a new account where they also begin to mock our hero. We are on the roof again, where we can see that our hero is still standing over Young Boom, and starts to ask him about his current gang, as most probably he is a member of it too. But our protagonist can't finish his thought, and he is really pissed off by the fact that he is in that gang. Our protagonist says that it is, but if he will give him a large, or rather just enough compensation, then he will calm down a little. Our hero immediately made a very sly face and asked Young Boom, "Is it true that he is a rich boy?" If it is true, then he asked to check Young Boom's honesty that he spoke so loudly about. He also hopes that the Young Boom didn't lie about his sponsorship and other things. Young Boom in turn made a scary face and said that everything our hero said seems ridiculous to him because he seems so sure of himself. He wants to be treated equally and not work under someone else's wing. But Young Boom accepts that our protagonist is not only good at fighting, so he agrees to our protagonist's terms and asks him to come downstairs. While our heroes are going downstairs, Young Boom says that everything he said before is true because the building they are in really belongs to his father. But in fact, the building is owned and operated by Young Bum himself. He started to talk about everything in the building itself. He said that there were many facilities, for example. From the second to the fourth floor, they had a cafe and a library for studies. But the whole fifth floor is a hotel, and sometimes even rented out to runaway families by Young Bum himself. But the first floor is just a cafe and an underground sauna. While Young Boom was showing him around, he even offered to come here if he would get tired of studying. When he opened the door, some mafia guy came out and he was glad to meet the Young Boom. But judging by the look on our hero's face, we could tell that he knew the very person who had just come out of the same sauna. Our hero immediately had images in his mind of the past, when he had been bullied. He remembered a girl had asked him not to worry because she could have taken care of everything herself. We cannot understand who it was and what our character felt at that moment, but we can safely say that it was something very important for him. When our protagonist came to his senses, he noticed that this bully was already standing and talking to Young Boom, asking who our protagonist is and why his name is the same as the loser they used to off. But Young Boom says that it's even cool because he's totally different from the same loser. He can fight, and he has a spirit of steel. The big guy can't believe his ears, so he asks Young Boom to confirm everything he says. But Young Boom says he'll just send him on a few errands. But the big guy still can't stop thinking that he doesn't like our hero because he has the same name as that, and he is always covering his eyes. Our hero, of course, did not like it, so he turned to the bouncer with eyes full of anger. If not, why the f*** is he trying to start a fight between them at their first meeting? So what if our hero doesn't like someone, and why should he care? Exhaling, the bouncer asked everyone present, and Young Boom in particular, if our protagonist was crazy, or did he just have a few extra lives somewhere in his pocket? The big man immediately began to threaten our protagonist, but our protagonist was not an easy one either. It was a frightful picture, though it was sprinkled with a Young Boom who showed with all his appearance that he did not want to see any fight between them. But nobody could calm down. The bouncer also continued to insist that our hero and he should go outside and check how strong each of them was. Our protagonist asked why they should go outside. After all, they could do everything right here and now. Young Boom was beginning to lose hope, but he decided to take matters into his own hands. He changed from an ordinary kid to a real mafia boss. He told everyone to stop immediately. He asked everyone what was wrong with them. Did they all want to tell him that they just didn't want to work anymore, or were they just looking down on him? Everyone immediately turned their attention to the bespectacled man, so he calmed down and gave our hero a job to do. He said it would be a fairly easy task, which in turn would be very much like an ordinary test. He gave him such an easy task because he still could not trust him 100%. He said that his task today would be to bring some children here from some designated place. So if our hero understood everything that Young Boom asked him to send him quickly to his new and first assignment. After listening to his new sponsor's orders, our protagonist goes to his first test. We see two girls sitting near benches, waiting for someone. Seeing our hero, the two girls immediately met him with a glance. The first thoughts of the beautiful ladies were that a handsome man is standing in front of them now. Our protagonist finished his first task too quickly, so he immediately rushed over to Young Boom's house. He had stirred his coffee and couldn't believe that our protagonist had finished so quickly. But our hero had found the answer by saying that he had just gone to the place he had been given a little earlier. He also talked to them and told them that he could give them shelter, so only then did he send them to the 5th floor of his building. Young Boom asked him if he had told them about the underground sauna and all the other conveniences of his building. Our protagonist replied that he had done everything perfectly. In fact, they had even said they would look into it and would be here soon. We can all understand that the 5th floor in this building is not just used as a hotel, but rather as a booker or a shelter for all fugitives. But since our hero finished his work so quickly, he asks him to follow the guy who was behind him, Kyoman, because he will tell our hero about his next assignment. As our protagonist walked right behind that fat guy, he could think that at this point the only thing he needs to do is just get a lot closer to Young Boom. But what will he do next? After all, the Young Boom is just a meticulous, so to have the trust of someone like that, he would just have to be in the same group as him. Sooner or later, he will start paying attention to our protagonist, but to do that, he will have to earn his trust. Our hero started to contradict himself at once, saying that he doesn't know why he needs to do that. After all, they cannot just take him for a little cruelty, because he is the person who always has an escape route, but not simple, but in fact reliable and thoughtful. At one moment, our hero all the same comes to the place where he had to go. He enters the computer room where there are other students who are also under the influence of the Young Boom. Our protagonist notices that something strange is going on there. because the fat man is talking about some kind of driver's license and is asking about some cars. He was told that it would take about 3 days, so the fatso asked to use some capital letters. To say that our hero didn't understand anything is to say that he didn't understand anything. So the fat man turned to him and said that now they had to start working. After all, they produce false documents in this room. He said that when someone comes to the shelter, they begin to make their false documents, then rent a car using their name, and then sell the rented car to other people. And what happens to these people, or rather their debts, they do not care. Our hero was already very upset by what he had just heard. But the fat man went on to say that minors can take out a ton of quick loans. So if their parents have insurance too, they can simply take out a loan using their insurance as collateral. Our protagonist was still silent, but the fat guy just wouldn't stop talking about it. He said that this way, all the kids who didn't know anything would have debts of over 100 million won. And when he said that she just spent the night at the shelter, or that she was just a high school student, they would give him 3 choices. The fat man already wanted to take the first way, but our protagonist guessed that it was just to pay them off with the help of their parents. He thought this way because it was the simplest and easiest option for everyone. But the second way is simply to work for a shelter. The fat man said that our hero had figured it out, and that he was probably a very smart guy. Our protagonist understood that because he realized that the guys who brought him into the building didn't look like they just wanted to make money there. And the fact that all of their clothes are all over the place confirms the facts in our protagonist's arguments that they are just working for the shelter because they have to. The fat man came even closer to our hero and said that he was unbelievably right, because everyone who had been in the young boom's shelter automatically became his debtors. Everyone, from the runaways to the adults. They become the very people who will do whatever young boom tells them to do. So Yeonbum can be called the man who controls everything in the neighborhood. He praises Yeonbum, but at one point he remembers that he didn't tell them about the third turn of events. He neglects to mention that the girls who have neither money nor power have a far worse fate than everyone else. The fatty licks his lips and lets our hero know that it's really so, that he should have guessed what awaits them. The fatso even says that he wishes it were only girls, but the fact that Yeonbum likes older women allows them to fully enjoy the younger girls. Our protagonist remembers that that's when that same fat guy molested his sister, so he remembers why he came here. He had come to this shelter to finally get rid of everyone who was there in person. Our hero just can't find his place, because he is ready to tear everyone to pieces. He feels as if he is about to explode with anger. He is looking at his new target, whom he will most likely take out first. That man's name is Choi Kyung-min. While he was telling everyone about his adventures with Yeonbum, our hero just looked at him, and thought about how he'd missed him for an incredibly long time. So once again, we're told that our protagonist's revenge is going to start with this fat guy. Our protagonist was just burning him with his gaze and wishing him to enjoy his life, because today is his last day when he could laugh so much together with his boyfriends. It was today that our hero appeared in his life. At another moment, John Min comes up to our hero and gives him a sheet of paper with some rules of the asylum, which he will be obliged to follow. In them is written everything about the Zetsu, or more precisely, the agreement of the shelter itself. While he is reading what is written there, he should go to the girls and get the girls to sign for it, because he is responsible for them. Our protagonist has attentively looked over the agreement and concluded that it looks like the most ordinary agreement, which is given to everyone in the orphanage. However, there are some fraudulent credit terms that are skillfully woven into it. Choi Kyung-min is still standing over our hero and smiling, so wide that we can see his extra chins. He says that if you run your eyes over it and then sign it, but if they are young and beautiful, they will certainly be able to get it back very quickly. So Choi Kyung-min can't even see anything wrong with what he says there, and he is very confident because he has learned by experience. He knows that such young and beautiful girls are really in demand. Choi Kyung-min doesn't even look at our hero anymore and asks him to hurry up, because the only thing our protagonist needs now is to get their signatures just for such a slippery contract like this. Our protagonist went to their room and noticed that they were cleaning up. They are stunned to ask what our hero is doing in their room. Our hero says it's nothing, he just needs their signatures. He threw the shelter contract right at their feet and told them that if they wanted to stay, they would just have to sign. The girl with blonde hair was not very happy about it, because they were going to leave soon, and in general, she did not like the way our protagonist treated her. She did not like the fact that he so negligently threw them right at their feet. Her friend had let her cool down. However, she did not calm down because apparently she does not like such tricks. Our hero made her feel like shit, and in addition she did not like the fact that she gave some strange papers which she asked to sign thoughtlessly. Our protagonist stood silent and remembered the words of Choi Kyung-min, who had let him know beforehand that it might not even be as easy as he thought, because many girls of that time are not as dumb as Choi Kyung-min would like them to be. Our hero smiled, but still agreed with his words. She and her friend would not sign anything while the white-haired girl was talking, and if he made her sign something, she would simply leave. She even wanted to call the police. Our hero was only concerned about the fulfillment of his mission. In fact, he understood that they would never give him an easy task, so he should just get those signatures, and it would not matter at all how he would get them. Our protagonist turned to the door and told himself that he would do what they had asked him to do. Our protagonist was at the door, and the girls did not understand why he had left so easily. They had many guesses, but our protagonist had just closed the door behind him and started to say that when they had told him about the police, he had been a bit frightened, but not at all. The girls started screaming and asking what was he doing. Why did our hero shut the door behind him? They started shouting, so Choi Kyung-min came to him. He opened the door, could barely find the keys, and came in asking what happened there. In front of him, he saw a scary scene. He saw our hero standing there, strangling one of the girls, while the other was lying right at his feet. Our protagonist looked incredibly calm, surprised at the fact that someone had entered their room. Our protagonist also calmly said that he had knocked one out, even though she had signed the contract. She resisted a little, but still our hero was able to cope with her. But our hero had other things on his mind at the moment. He asked the fat man how he had found him, because he had said that he would be waiting for him somewhere else. The fat man said that he was worried about how everything was going there. But all that he said made us all understand that he was worried for nothing, because he was shocked at what a strange person our protagonist was. He confessed that he had purposely put the girls in a room with a CCTV to see how our protagonist would cope with the task, but he had just started to strangle the girls. The fat man was looking at our hero and could not understand if our hero was really so strange. Our protagonist was standing over the bodies of the girls, glancing a little at the fat man. Judging by the expression on the fat man's face, our protagonist realized that he had most likely succeeded in his task. Our hero was confident in his strength, because he understood that all this test was only for the purpose of feeling the ground. Our hero was not worried, because he knew that there was CCTV in the room, he was aware of their activities, and he also knew that the girls who were with him in the room were hired actresses. So all the results that our protagonist has received can be considered as a passing test. Our protagonist felt a strange aura, so at that very moment he noticed a young boom, who walked by the room where the test was held, and asked our hero with the same strange manner of speech. He asked our hero if he was anxious. Yes, and if not, he asked him to forgive him, because he might have upset him, because of the nature of their business, trust is the most important thing that can be. So they had to make sure that our protagonist was right for them. But young Boom immediately started clapping his hands, saying that just because of the picture he saw, he realized that he really likes our hero and generally hopes to work well with him. Young Boom did not hide the fact that the girls were actresses, so he asked our protagonist not to worry. But our hero didn't listen to him. He only thought about his plan. He thought that he had to act like a total bastard in front of you, young Boom, because only then he could crawl out of his snake hole. While our protagonist was thinking about that, Young Boom immediately changed his face and still offered our protagonist to have some fun with them. After the young Boom's speech, our hero decided to show him what they were really doing. The first thing they did was to go to the girls' room, where the fat man began to show all the charms of their work. The first thing they did was to turn off the lights. The fat man said that our hero had to study very well, because from that moment he would train him seriously. The first thing he taught our main hero was to check the room for hidden cameras. He would have to take his phone and put red cellophane under the camera. He said that this is how they increase their income from the girls' room. Most of the time the girls don't notice anything like that, but the fat man said that they'd had enough of talking, so they should get to work. The fat guy kept telling our protagonist to be careful with these cameras while he was changing the batteries, because these cameras are very expensive and also very fragile. He also advised that if our protagonist wants them to be hidden, he should put them in hidden places, because they just need a good angle. Our protagonist can't say that he likes it, but he likes the fact that he is now fully involved in Young Boom's crime. So as long as he works as a small potato, everything he wants to do will come true. While the fat man also continues to praise Young Boom by saying that no one has ever thought of doing something like that before him, our hero continues to think about his next plan. Even though our hero didn't respond to the fat guy, he still tried to talk to our protagonist about Young Boom and how he was such a genius since his childhood, and had participated in all internet crimes, and even had an outcast in the past who also tried to mock young Boom. It was about our protagonist, but the fat guy didn't know that. He went on to say that our protagonist was the one who was bullied the most. Even the school broadcasts that were filmed with him were all Young Boom's ideas. Fatty also created a characteristic of Young Boom himself, saying that he had never climbed the barricade and skillfully manipulated behind his back, turning people into complete idiots. Our hero went on about his business and said that he was well aware of that, because he is not a man who wants to get his hands dirty doing dirty business. But our protagonist was interrupted by the fact that the fat man had mentioned our protagonist's sister, saying that he had an older sister who had caused many quarrels with our hero. He even remembered the reason why he had been bullied even more. He remembered that our hero was incredibly poor because their house had burned down, and his sister was the very thing that Young Boom was dreaming about. Our protagonist decided to stop the dialogue simply by asking the fat man why the camera didn't turn on, even though our protagonist had installed it like he said, but it still wouldn't turn on. Our protagonist asked him to look at the cause, but the fat man lost his temper. He did not like it, because he knew that our hero would be in trouble. He came to the camera and noticed that the socket in which the camera was supposed to be plugged in was just hanging in the hands of our protagonist. He asks our hero to explain what that thing was doing in his hands. However, it seems that our protagonist was too angry with the fat man's behavior. The fat man wanted to hit our hero, but he grabbed his arm and broke it instantly with a blow to his knee. The fat man cried out in pain, but our protagonist kept breaking his body parts over and over again. Our hero breathed a sigh of relief while he was doing this, because he thought that he would be in much more trouble than he had imagined. But he turned out to be incredibly weak, so that is why our protagonist can safely follow his plan. While the fat man was yelling and asking what our protagonist was doing, and why he was breaking his arm, our hero began to tell his story, telling about the very outcast sister that the fatso had spoken about not long before. The fat man didn't understand the connection, and our hero continued to put a rosette around the fat man's hands. The fatso didn't understand what the girl had to do with it. He was more interested in why our hero kept hurting him. Our protagonist kept silent, but at one point he crept up to the fat man's ear, put the outlet around his arm again, and said that the very same girl was his sister. The fat man didn't understand what he was saying, so our protagonist said to him that it was his sister, and he said that he was Li Yunxiang who was humiliated by them. So he put his face right up to the fat guy and asked him why he didn't laugh, because it was so funny. Our protagonist began the story by saying that he and his sister have a difference of ages of only 3 years. Although he was small compared to his peers, he still relied on his sister all the time, even though she was only 3 years older than him. Even when he had dark periods in his life, his sister was always his support. However, all this was only until the case of arson ended, because they temporarily moved from the shelter to the building of a state institution. Our hero understood that although this shelter was just a semi-common little room with poor living conditions, they were still lucky, because the conclusion of an agreement with the victims was easy, and his sister, an almost adult girl, lived in a hostel. We see that in the same room our hero started a conversation with a possible mistress of the house, who asked him if something happened at school because he does not look like himself. The hostess talked about the fact that he did not need to worry, because she believes that our hero would definitely not be able to do this. After all, everything cannot happen so simply, and our protagonist could not simply set fire to the house, having taken a dose of narcotic substances before that. So the hostess asked our protagonist if someone from the school made him do this. Didn't they tell him that it would just be fun and something worth trying? She began bombarding him with questions that our protagonist didn't want to answer, so he just looked down. However, our hero found himself in real agony when she asked him about bullying at school. However, we still understand that before our hero was not just a hostess, but the mother of our hero. He thought that she would not believe him, but their dialogue was interrupted by the sister of our protagonist, who returned home. She asked what was happening and was already raising her hand to our hero to hit him. Our protagonist closed his eyes and began to cover himself with his hands, but the only thing our protagonist's sister did was simply clasp his cheeks with both hands and began to examine our protagonist's face. He turned to his mother and began to ask her very sharply and in surprise, why did the face of our protagonist seem so thin to her? She looked at her mother and brother and realized that they had actually gone through a lot in such a short time. The sister continued to ask her mother questions, but she replied that because of the whole situation, she simply could not eat calmly. Our hero nevertheless understood why he remembered this moment, Our hero realized that it was his sister who was the support for their family. After all, it was she who, as soon as their house burned down, took a week-long vacation to be with her family. Lee Yoon-sung thought that his sister was an incredibly cheerful sports college student and also very beautiful. Our protagonist was always surprised by the fact that he absolutely always remained calm, even in such situations. When he told his sister about everything, as well as about the fact that their grandmother lost consciousness, thereby receiving psychological trauma. Our protagonist saw only his sister's back, but he understood that he saw not just his sister, but that person who is now just holding on with all his might so as not to explode. But our hero could not do anything, because he seemed to have lost his tongue. We are again transported into the past, already to the school of our hero, where classes have already ended. Our protagonist, who was on duty at that moment, is reminded to go to the teacher's room for printouts. However, our protagonist is distracted by his phone, which received a message where he was asked to dance some kind of dance for 30 minutes. Our hero has already written about being let go to the teacher's room for a while, so they let him. Our hero carried the papers and thought that only recently, whatever he did in those moments, he had to report about it and get permission from the chat. The same chat in which all his classmates sat. He even remembered that the person who gave our hero the right to do something was called Frodo with glasses in the chat. However, our protagonist can guess who could give himself such a nickname, although he does not have any evidence. He thinks that it was most likely Young Bum, because there is no one else who could come up with something like that. Our hero brought the printouts to the office and put them on the table. However, the class started laughing and talking about the fact that he shouted much louder, and no one even allowed him to put them on their table. Our hero asks the ill-fated chat again if he can look into the restroom for a very short time. However, this request was immediately rejected by the same Frodo with glasses. Another memory of our hero comes when we see two boys who have just come from training. They want to agree to play football again. They don't want to because it's hot outside today, so the conversation was slowly but surely only about football. However, at one point they notice something strange. We see that when approaching our protagonist, the boys began to smell a very unpleasant smell. Our hero pissed, so it was not for nothing that next to him he stank of urine. Our hero was very scared, and he thought that his life actually seemed to him a living hell. The boys, having approached their desk, looked into the chat, where they saw that our hero was simply not allowed to go to the toilet. So this was precisely the reason that the class smelled of urine. Our protagonist said that at that moment he was just one step away from insanity. He was exactly the kind of person who was bullied absolutely. When our hero got tired, or they just wanted to kick him, they did it right away. Everyone beat him and told him to stop being lazy to carry out all their orders. Even when our hero fell from their pushes and blows, the children still blamed him for this as if he was to blame for everything. So when he fell, they started punishing him again. At one of these moments, our hero was beaten by his sister, who began to scatter all the guys who attacked her brother. No one understood who she was, but our protagonist looked at her with admiration, because all this happened in the blink of an eye. On the day when a whole crowd decided to beat our main character, his sister was able to save him. She even went crazy from the fury of what she saw. And besides, our protagonist understood that high school students should not be given back to high school students, because the difference was not just in age, but also in physical strength. Although our hero was relieved to see his sister, it was still before our hero noticed that Young Bum had become interested in her. He looked at her with the same admiration. While he was looking at Lee Yoon-sung's sister, he told our protagonist that he would not only allow him to do whatever he wanted, but on the contrary, would forbid him more. Our hero was still lying on the ground and realized that he had a very bad feeling about this whole thing. One morning, our hero began to receive messages from that same chat, so he immediately became nervous and went to check his phone. However, he did not have time to grab him, because his sister was ahead of him in this matter. She looked at the entire chat, where it was written that Lee Yoon-sung was banned from absolutely everything tomorrow. She asked what it was, but our protagonist asked her not to take it all the wrong way. He asked her to believe that these were just jokes from his friends, but his sister was too serious, so she immediately turned to him. Our hero thought that his sister immediately began to scold him, but it was the other way around. She pressed him to her, saying that she understands that it hurts him a lot, because he goes through all this alone. But everything will be fine, because his sister will be with him. Our hero could not believe his ears, so she burst into tears. The sister, in turn, was incredibly serious, so she promised him that now, whoever disturbed him, everyone would be punished. The sister of our protagonist immediately went to deal with everyone who offended him, so the very fat man was the first who became her target. The hero's sister was resolutely ready to kick the fat man, but our hero asked her to stop because he was afraid of her. The fat man was staring at her like she was prey. Yes, and it was not even unexpected because it was already clear that he did not see any, or rather his opponent, in her. So he just exhaled right into the face of our hero's sister and said that there was nothing like that, because there was some kind of misunderstanding, because he had long been expelled from school. But he sees our protagonist for the first time. He carries out assignments, but he cannot but offer her a meeting with someone. Yong-bum, sitting in the car, simply could not hide his happiness because everything went just according to his plan. He has everything: his father's car, cologne, and even the chewing gum itself, so he simply won't have anything to worry about. He was very worried and was looking forward to something because he thought that he would even have problems if he did everything right there in the car. He was excited because just the sister of our hero was older than him, and as we already learned a few times ago, Yong-bum loves women who are older than him. So besides, this girl was the sister of one of his classmates. It all boiled down to the fact that for a guy who had begun to experience puberty, the appeal of his idea of being with a woman older than his age was provocative. At this moment, the Yong-bum was very frightened, because our protagonist's sister had just opened the car door and started looking at him. The Yong-bum was confused by this, so he began to ask her all sorts of questions about what she was doing there with him, and how she was doing. However, the sister did not understand why this boy knew her name at all. However, the Yong-bum didn't see anything strange about it, because it's normal to know the name of his friend's sister and classmate. Yes, and he even said that he was a close friend of our hero, and even wanted to ask him a little about something. The sister couldn't listen to this anymore, so she immediately ordered Yong-bum not to lie, because she guessed that he was the person with the glasses from the chat. Our protagonist's sister immediately grabbed Yong-bum's collar and threw him out of the car, saying that garbage like Yong-bum most often poisons other children. Yes, I even asked him if his parents knew about his activities. At that moment, Yong-bum realized that all his fantasies about older women had simply sunk into oblivion. But our hero's sister still continued to scold him, asking more and more questions. He couldn't even answer why he had a car while he was in high school. So he just wanted to come up with a plan to avoid this conversation and basically run away from this meeting. However, he nevertheless decided that it would not be according to his principles to run away from there. So he began to rise from the ground and tell the sister of our protagonist that, most likely, she was not even aware of how children behave at the present time. He decided to go on the offensive, so he continued to talk about how for children now, all this is an empty phrase. He even asked her, with his usual face for such conversations, if she knew about juvenile delinquents. He said that nothing will even happen to people like them, because it doesn't even matter what they will and will do. So he made it even worse to see. He began to lick his lips and say that in place of our protagonist's sister, he would be more kind, because it is he who can turn our hero's life into an even greater hell. The Yong-bum thought that because he was underage, he would definitely avoid anything that might come after him. However, at that moment, his dreams were shattered again, as our protagonist's sister stabbed him right in the face. She began to sit right on the Yong-bum and continued to hit him blow after blow, while saying that if he had lost his fear, then she would help him find him. She even started laughing at him, because he really thought that nothing would happen to them. However, she decided to congratulate him, because today is his lucky day, because he will finally be able to find out whether his theory is correct or not. It was only then that Yong-bum realized that even though his plan was good, but until the moment when all the crap was beaten out of him, which is more for a person like him. He lay in his car and could not collect his thoughts because his whole face became beaten and bloody. He was trembling with fear, so our hero's sister approached him, saying that she had called for the driver to pick him up. She also advised him to wipe his snot and blow home before he changed his mind. While she was moving away from the car, he nevertheless reminded him that if he even once touched her brother with his finger, she would come again and this time would tear him to smithereens. The Yong-bum's head was tilted, and he himself looked rather overpowered. All his humiliation was mixed with the fact that he was even beaten by an ordinary woman. Next, we see a fat man who came out of the toilet while holding his stomach. He couldn't understand what had happened to him. Was his supper a little spoiled? However, at that moment, he saw a girl walking away from the car. The fat man looked and did not understand. Did Yong-bum finish it so quickly? He wanted to call his friend a bad word, But at that moment, Yongbum himself jumped out of the window of his car and ordered him to grab our protagonist's sister. The fat man could not understand what was going on, but the Yongbum screamed that our hero's sister humiliated him. He said this with such vehemence that he even began to press the gas pedal, which made everyone incredibly surprised. A Yongbum in his car at a high speed, which he gained in such a short time, crashed into a tree. We see that no one was hurt, but the fat man was very dissatisfied with the behavior of his friend, because he almost knocked him and our hero's sister. The sister of the protagonist was shocked because she could not believe that an ordinary schoolboy would be able to decide on such a thing. But the Yongbum was not the least bit alarmed. Only one thing bothered him: the fact that the sister of our protagonist was somehow able to dodge his car. However, without waiting for his target to get up, he again began to direct his car towards it and once again pressed the gas pedal. He smiled because he expected that this time he could break all her legs, so that she would become a cripple and no longer be able to play sports. He accelerated at full speed and still managed to hit his target, fulfilling his plan. Our hero tells us that it was on that day that his sister lost both her legs, which made her become very crippled and quit athletics. Sometime later she began to swim, but a short time later she died in an accident. We are again transported to the present, where our hero still continues to strangle that same fat man. He asked him if he remembered what they did, and I asked him again, why is he not laughing? The fat man did not care much about what our hero told him, but he was worried about whether our protagonist really returned to them just to take revenge on him and Yo Yongbum. At this moment, the fat man wanted to help with his hand and somehow get out of the shackles, but our hero pulled the strings, thereby causing incredible pain in his hand. Our hero said that he came here for a reason, because everything has its limits. Because most likely the fat man thought that our hero came to them to destroy everything connected with Yongbum, and him step by step. At this moment, we see that Yongbum is sitting in his office and receives a message on his phone that his account has been frozen, so he will have to go to the bank to find out everything in more detail. He thought that they were most likely scammers again, but more and more messages with the same context began to arrive on his phone. He couldn't understand why all his accounts started freezing at the same time. We see that our protagonist is smiling, thinking that most likely everything should already begin. But the fat man also lies on the floor and asks what is wrong with our protagonist. However, our hero still decides to show his favor to such trash, so he still gives him his plan. What will happen to them in the next couple of days? The first thing many will do is find the body of a fat man in this building. The fat man did not understand anything at first, but our hero immediately began to choke him and tell him not to worry and not to misunderstand him, because our hero will not be the person who will kill him, because it will be Yo Yongbum, who simply can't find a place for himself out of anger. He looked at his phone shaking, but our protagonist continued to say that during a fit of rage something would definitely happen to his head. The Yongbum was so angry that he bit his lower lip until it bled, and then completely threw his phone on the floor with such anger and force that even his parents came into his room, who could not understand what was going on with him, that he was so noisy. The Yongbum immediately tried to put on his usual expression, saying that he was sorry because he screamed so much because his grades had deteriorated a little, but he definitely doesn't want that right now. His parents immediately asked him not to lock himself in his room alone with only tasks, and even advised him to get some fresh air just to be sure. Our protagonist closed the door behind him, but his parents were still in shock. They were whispering among themselves, since they had probably never seen a Yongbum in such a state before. However, they still came to a common opinion, saying that sometimes children are disappointed in something, so this is all just in the order of things. However, the Yongbum's face did not show that his behavior was in the order of things, because his entire face was covered with veins, his eyes were filled with blood, and his lower lip was completely bleeding. Our hero was also made by a fat man, and was silent, but the fat man could not believe in the words of our hero, because why did he need to kill him? Yongbum definitely wouldn't do that. However, our hero says that he is already on his way, and also asks the fat man to remember the moment when he gave him the bank book that the fat man gave our protagonist earlier. Our protagonist said that he just played with her a little, and also the fact that it is the fat man's account that is tied to it. We see the moment when Yo Yongbum invites our hero to have fun together, so that's when he got his first job, which we all remember. He handed our hero a bank book, which he will now use daily. All salary, contributions, bonuses will go to her. It was also said by Yongbum that she was registered as a homeless person, so the police would simply not be able to find her. Our protagonist also sits on the fat man and smiles at him, saying that he simply could notice how the fat man deleted the entire history of the transaction. But the task was that our protagonist was still able to restore everything. It even turned out that all the related accounts that the guys use in their shelter were there. Yes, and it even seemed to our hero that according to the accounts, one could say that he put his hand into the accounts of Yo Young-bum. So that is why all the accounts that were associated with the fat man became frozen. Although the fat man is screaming, we understand that our hero simply reported the death of the account holder, so that is why the account was frozen. Our protagonist ended up saying that he didn't have to worry, after all. All the blocked accounts were on the helpless, so everything our protagonist reported on behalf of the fat man. So he didn't even need to go to the police, saying that their fake accounts were frozen. And that can only mean one thing. Now Yo Young-bum will never know the real reason for blocking accounts. The fat man continues to scream. But our hero is still smiling, and finally asks the fat man, so who will Yo Young-bum suspect? So our hero invites him to make the right and wise decision, because he gives him a great chance. After all, he should have understood that Young-bum would definitely not let him go. Because if he tells about our protagonists, then all the money that he appropriated will definitely come up. So he asks the fat man to take full responsibility for what exactly he is about to report to everyone. And if he tells, then the person who lured out all the information will find it. We see that the fat man nevertheless chose the fate of keeping everything a secret. He was already lying in some room, where he was beaten by some thug. He asked the fat man if he really froze the accounts, even without knowing anything. The fat man continued to prove his innocence to them, but he immediately got hit in the face. The thug talked about how he feels when the fat man lies to him, so he asks him not to lie to him again in the future. He even said that when they first met the fat man, he immediately smelled betrayal just by looking at his dull face. So from now on, he doesn't even have the right to be around Young-bum. This thug was a man named Kwon Jang-soo, who was not much, not less than 19 years old. Kwon-chan turned to Young-bum and asked if he felt the same way. However, he said that if you look at this business, you can understand that there is definitely a traitor among them, but still confirms that the main suspect still remains a fat man. He continued by saying that this is not even the first time that he is suspected of something. And more than that. This time, they even found out that all his accounts were frozen. Young-bum turned to face him and said coldly that he definitely wouldn't want to doubt the fat man. But the thing is, everything fits together for a strange reason. So the Young-bum asks the fat man to tell the whole truth at once. However, after looking at Young-bum's face, the fat man decided not to say anything. He understood that our protagonist just wants him to keep his mouth shut and pretend that he doesn't even know anything. The fat man nevertheless decided not to say anything and thought only that our hero would keep his promise. We see that shortly before the fat man began to be beaten, our hero offered him one solution to their problem. Having told something to the fat man, he did not like it very much. However, our protagonist has made it clear that it is the fat man who is not currently in an advantageous position, so that he does not even have another solution to the problem. He told him to shut up and do exactly as he says, but our protagonist will take care of the rest. Our hero entered their room, who immediately saw a fat man lying. However, to the surprise of everyone, our hero did not feel sorry for him or ask what happened, because he had a plan. First of all, he immediately rushed to the fat man and kicked him in the face, and then it completely looked like a beating. The thug didn't know who it was and wanted to stop him. However, the Young-bum asked him not to do anything, because our protagonist was busy with something quite interesting for the Young-bum. He introduced him, saying that he was their new recruit. Our protagonist turned to Young-bum and asked him in a very aggressive tone if he was going to set him up too. The Young-bum did not understand anything, because he did nothing and our hero invaded them himself. But our hero reached for the fat man's pants and pulled out a strange package. He showed it to Young-bum and said that it was a bag of drugs, which could only make it clear that the person who managed Young-bum's money turned out to be a drug addict. Our protagonist went up to the fat man and started hitting him again. The fat man was shocked because he could not believe that our protagonist had at least some kind of plan. After all, he does not even believe that he can fix everything by simply turning him into a drug addict. A Young-bum asked our hero if the fat man was really a drug addict, because if so, then our hero needs to stop the beating. The Young-bum said that now the whole picture fell into place, but he could not understand what the fat man was up to. However, our protagonist began to ask Young-bum if he would take all the responsibility, because our protagonist almost lost all his money that he deposited in that bank account. He asked Young-bum to answer everything clearly and distinctly, because our hero made it clear that he is damn sensitive when it comes to his savings. The Yongbum, in turn, made a strange expression on his face and said that he still understood what really happened, because he understands that money is very important. He will even reimburse everything, but he even had a reverse offer, which was that our hero would take the post of a fat man. The fat man asked himself, was it the goal of our protagonist to trample and take his place? The fat man realized that using the loopholes of a fake bank account, he created this situation himself. He was even able to get rid of himself as an unnecessary bait and take advantage of Yongbum's suspicions. Our hero was simply praised to the point of impossibility. But at that moment, the thug asked to wait. After all, something seemed strange to him and our hero. The thug began to go to our protagonist with the words that the eyes are the mirror of the soul. Our protagonist stood in front of the bully, who wanted to start beating our protagonist. He came out saying that our hero's eyes were burning because our hero's eyes looked very suspicious. Kwon Chan-soo, who was in front of our hero, kept saying that our hero's eyes are incredibly false, so he just can't let it go. He pressed his forehead to our protagonist's forehead as if to show that he's ready to fight. Our protagonist showed the big man that he's not afraid, which let Kwon Chan-soo know that he's not a timid one. He put on his hood so the big guy was surprised. He asked him what he was doing, but our protagonist was confident in himself, because while he was still young, he had learned some tricks against such giants. Our hero could not frighten some men because of his unusual size for humans. Our hero could not even avoid a battle with him. He remembered a conversation with his old teacher, where he told him that he would fight against the giant and use a wig to be glued to his head. He was afraid of one thing, that his wig would fall, but the teacher thought only of the battle with his huge opponent. He said that fighting close to him would be dangerous enough, so it would be better to fight in the hood. Our protagonist was surprised. How could a hood help him? But the teacher said only one thing tightened it up tight. Our protagonist tightened the hood and attacked the big man, but he was not moved. The bouncer went mad because he thought that our hero was just laughing at him. But our hero just took off his hoodie and remembered again the words of his teacher that the reason why he should not tighten the hood was not so that his wig would not come off, but so that it would be easier to take off his clothes. After all, even if the opponent is bigger than someone else, you should always shorten the distance first, so that they can't use their fists. But when they are aiming at you, you should aim at their blind spot, which will appear at the moment when they are pulling someone's clothes off. Only then can you finish the business with such a person. Our protagonist did so because he remembered that when you are fighting with a man who is bigger than you never have the right to make a mistake. Our protagonist at this time kept on beating the bouncer, asking him if he was just humiliating him because he's a newcomer and just looks like a target. However, at that moment, the young boom still stopped our hero from striking the last and decisive blow. He had already seen that enough from the big guy, because it was already clear to everyone. The bouncer wanted to hit and even kill our hero, but our protagonist let him go, as if to spite everybody. He explained it by saying that it was a young boom who ensured the well-coordinated work, so he would obey. The young boom appreciated it, but the bouncer couldn't get over his boorish behavior. He even said that he liked our protagonist a lot more than the bouncer himself. After that sentence, the young boom even decided that all the duties that were assigned to the bouncer were now on the shoulders of our main character. Even though he shouted that he has snake eyes and can't be trusted, he shut his mouth and told him to be quiet because he's the boss and not a young boom. However, the young boom still gives the order to the bouncer to get their old manager out of the way, while our hero boldly walks away. Our hero has left the room, but he shows excitement on his face, as he didn't expect the bouncer to be able to take a leg kick right to his face. But he decides to be more careful next time. We see before us a school where the teacher asks the class not to forget to do their homework, which she will give, and asks everyone to prepare for next week's test. At the end, she calls young Boom, who turns out to have more than 100 points on the test. She even asks him if she should expect him to do well on the entrance exams, but he is sure that he needs to do a little more to be sure of his abilities. Their conversation is watched by our protagonist, who realizes that the young bum seems to be a model student. He compares the young boom's personal life and his social life are completely separated from each other, so he leads a perfect double life. Our protagonist compares him to a fortified wall because he is a bandit inside, but in front of his school and family, he looks like a respectable person and gets catharsis from it. At one point, we see our hero clapping to all the workers and asking them if they have all heard that he will now be replacing their former boss in their field. But he asks them not to be surprised, because if you think about it, there is nothing special about him either. We can see that while our hero is doing all the dirty work, young Boom is spending all this time at school, where he gets praise from the teacher. Everyone understands that the young Boom does not like his teacher, but he likes it. The teacher asks him not to say those things about them because they are teacher and student. But during the class, when young Bum went back to his seat, the bald-headed teacher called young Bum for a short talk. The teacher took the young Boom outside and asked him why he did something. The young Boom didn't understand anything, but he had already made a very angry grimace. His teacher immediately showed him a post on one of the networks saying that someone had leaked the answers to the test. The young Boom was very surprised, because he didn't even think that his teacher would give anyone else the answers. But the teacher was very angry because he had never given the answers to anyone else. The teacher said that he wouldn't go down alone, so he would take the student with him. But young Boom drew his eyes to such an extent that it would scare everyone and said that it wasn't him. He started to scold him, because it was the teacher who got caught, even though the young Boom gave him a huge sum of money every month. Our protagonist had been watching all this, so after their conversation, which he overheard, he immediately called his sister and said that the real leader of this business is the school teacher. It was because of this way of doing business that they were able to attract so many students. Our protagonist didn't expect such a close relationship between a teacher and such an asshole. Our hero's sister asked our hero if she should just post it on the site or something else. Our protagonist said that it should be done, because they will leave everything for public opinion. Our protagonist is not just standing there eavesdropping, but is standing beside the very same teacher who overheard everything. He showed her who the young Boom really is. Our hero asks the teacher why she is so surprised, that she wants to hear something more interesting. He said that Jong Bum put a hidden camera on her desk. Our hero said that because the way he wants to beat young Boom won't be fun at all, but most likely the toughest in South Korea. However, we find ourselves transported back to school when young Boom sets up a scent diffuser for his beloved teacher. She was delighted, and now she can enjoy her work with her children more. Young Boom said she shouldn't say that, and that she should just tell him if she needed help. He also said that the liquid in the diffuser would run out very quickly, so that she could ask him if she needed anything. But at that moment, we see that the teacher is sitting in front of the diffuser, and she is very tense, because she thinks that her pupil has given her a diffuser with a hidden camera. She recalled the words of our protagonist, who had told her very quietly that a hidden camera was watching her. He said that young Boom wanted to know everything about her, so he brought her gifts like that. The teacher was very shocked, so she asked our protagonist if she should go to the police. However, our hero said that if she reported to the police, she could get hurt, because the young Boom specializes in making a criminal out of the victim. So he finished his conversation and told her to give it to him, since something was posted on the school's website to incriminate him. He even suggested to himself that he would start by cutting off the young Boom's right hand. But young Boom is standing in his room and can't figure out who did it and ratted him out. He thinks it was either the head teacher or someone in the class. The big man also expressed his point of view, saying that if it had been the main teacher or an honor student, he should be beaten up first so that he would confess for sure. Because only fists can show who is really guilty, because they can threaten someone from the very beginning. But our hero called the bouncer an idiot at once, saying that he must be an idiot if he worked like that all the time. If he does that, he must be a shitty right hand. What does he do? It is not the way an intelligent man should act if he wants to find someone. The big man started to fly with his fists at our protagonist, but the young Boom stopped him. Our protagonist wasn't even furious, so he just said one word, "Ippy." Young Boom didn't understand at first, but our protagonist explained that it's easy to find someone by his IP address. Our hero understood that this can happen sooner or later, so he had prepared a very interesting sheet. The young Boom was looking at the paper and could not understand who could do so. Our hero immediately got the young Boom out of that state by saying that it didn't matter who that person was, because the only thing they should be worried about right now was just catching him. Our protagonist went on to say that there was a high school student living at that address, so he immediately suggested that everyone should go have fun. Our protagonist made a very sinister grimace and then said that he was very kind today, so he would give the bully a few points in front of the boss. Young Boom was furious with him, so he immediately told Kong Chang-soo to go get him and bring him to him right away. The bully immediately went out the door. Although he was not very happy about it, I could tell by his gait. The big man came out, and young Boom said he had helped him greatly and made him feel much better. Our hero smiled and said that if young Boom needed anything like that, he would be able to talk to our hero right away, because he can find a way to help him. Although our protagonist said it very convincingly, he decided to say in the end that he would do everything for an extra fee, of course. The young boom smiled and said that he would definitely do that. The young boom had some business to attend to, so he left right away and was summoned by his favorite teacher. She went into her office and asked for his help. Of course, he didn't mind helping such a beautiful and mature woman, so he asked her what he should do for her. The teacher got right down to business, saying that this time her principal had given her too much work to do, so she was very busy. After all, she was made to clean from the toilets to the corridors. But what surprised young Boom was that he did not see the diffuser that he had brought as a present to his beloved teacher. Both young Boom and his teacher were very tense at that moment. Most likely the teacher was checking to see if what our protagonist had said was true. However, after making sure, she said that he was taken away for cleaning. She apologized because he had given it to her. The young Boom was very careful about what he did, so it made him mad. The teacher remembered the conversation with our hero in the schoolyard, where she had also heard that she should have understood how dangerous juvenile delinquents were, and the crimes that had been committed for sexual purposes. Our hero said that everything the young Boom has is under strict control, so that even if he has a problem, he will immediately have several ways to retreat. However, it's even more likely that in the situation of the teacher, he thought of everything for sure. The teacher at that moment didn't even know what to do, because she would never have thought that her beloved student could be such a bastard. But our protagonist assured her that he would block all their escape routes. After all, sometimes an ordinary surveillance camera can be a good indoor camera. We see a young Boom standing in front of the door to the women's bathroom, where the diffuser is located. Many women look at him with surprise because they would never have thought that someday they would have such a worthwhile thing in their bathroom. But young Boom was not in the mood for jokes, because if someone noticed this camera, he would immediately become a young criminal. The young Boom clenched his hands and began to sweat. Because he could not allow that to happen, he had to prevent everything. And he didn't even understand why it was necessary for the principal to put a diffuser in the toilet in the first place. He stood there thinking about it all next to the toilet. But the teachers who came out noticed him and asked why he was not in class, because he should start any minute. Young Boom was so nervous at that moment, he even turned away from the teachers who asked him not to act weird and just take his stuff and go back to class. Our protagonist stood in confusion, because he had heard that the teachers were also pleasantly surprised that the diffuser in the toilet had been replaced. All these conversations further shocked the young Boom. He knew that he just couldn't let this happen, so he would have to remove this thing from the teacher's toilet as soon as possible. He reached right for the door handle and thought of a lot of plans. Some were crazier than the last, but in the end he decided that he should open the door. Then we see our hero's sister sitting in a chair and ask our hero if he just wants to expose the young Boom to the public, just by making someone install hidden cameras in the toilet, or not. However, at this point, we switch back to the school where we see that young Boom is surrounded by many reporters, who ask him how many more hidden cameras are hidden in their school. After all, they can find out everything just by resorting to forensic information. So our protagonist told them that it would be just like that, because he would become a criminal who installs hidden cameras in toilets, and that it would be like the death penalty in South Korea. Our protagonist could not have imagined a better plan for revenge. But at this moment, we see that young Boom still went into the toilet and saw that there was not his diffuser, but his likeness on the sink. However, we can see that the new diffuser is in the wrong teacher's toilet because in fact it was in the men's room for male teachers. Our hero continued the conversation with his sister, saying that it will not be enough for revenge, and he certainly did not say anything. He smiled broadly, and yet he said what he did not say exactly and what toilet will be this diffuser. Our hero wanted not only to lay the blame on him, but also to turn him into the worst of perverts. A young Boom heard from a nearby toilet that one of the men had noticed the hidden camera in the diffuser after all. So while young Boom was biting his lip again, our protagonist told his sister to make public the fact that one of the students had installed a hidden camera in their school, more specifically in the men's room designed for teachers. We are transported to the place where the bouncer was sent by our protagonist and young Boom. However, he ended up in high school. The big guy said that someone sent this letter about someone named young Boom. The big guy said that all that was written in the letter was the IP address of their place, that very computer room. However, all the workers did not understand what the bouncer, who had just entered their building, was talking about. Many members of the club started to approach him one by one and ask him if he had money on him, because they were not even interested in the IP he was talking about. They even started laughing because his accent was very similar to that of an animal, and he looked like a monkey himself. The big man kept silent and was not going to do anything about it, But all the members of this club surrounded him even more and began to ask the same questions. They were surprised that he continued to ignore them, but the bouncer did not care about them, because he understood that he had most likely been cheated by our hero. After a moment, we see that the bouncer is already standing on a mountain lying down, those same nerds from the club. He was sure that he was just out of his mind at this turn. He even threatened our hero that he would definitely kill him as soon as he got to his dirty face. Then we see young Boom again, who can still hear the conversation from the neighboring toilet. There's probably a camera in the diffuser after all. One of the teachers didn't believe it could be true, but his colleague still said it was. At that moment, the teacher, who was holding the diffuser, began to shout, because he saw in the diffuser not just an air freshener, but a real camera. He shouted in anger and could not understand who had done such a dirty deed. After all, what kind of person would install a hidden camera in the men's room? They immediately wanted to call the police. But even though young Boom was angry, he was sure that those guys, or rather teachers, didn't even have any evidence to accuse him of such a dirty deed. The young Boom would just say that he didn't know anything about it. But the teacher, who was already furious, said that he knew a way to catch the bastard who had installed the camera. He told his colleague that in their time it was possible to call in a digital criminal check to catch the culprit. He found out about it the same time they were given a lecture on sexual security. He said that if the camera didn't work, he would find the camera and then go to the store where he bought it. They just have to go and solve the case themselves. But the young Boom was not in the mood for jokes and the whole forensic science, because that day the young Boom felt that sex education and punishment was just incredibly cruel and righteous now. He felt the very horror of what could have happened to him. The young Boom was already sitting at home and biting his nails, because before he could deal with all sorts of problems immediately by just walking away from them. But still he knew that it was only a matter of time before he was caught. He was trembling with fear and did not know what he had to do. After all, what he should do to get out of such a ridiculous situation. At that moment, young Boom received a phone call from our protagonist. He said he was finally able to pick up the phone. He wanted to tell him that our protagonist had finished everything he had asked him to do. They made about 10 new maps, that is, more than 10 victims were found today. Young Boom said that everything is fine, but he asked our guest to talk to him tomorrow, because he can't talk about that today. Our hero asked him what happened. Is he worried about the situation at school that happened earlier that day? Young Boom got mad, so our hero said that he didn't mean anything by it. He didn't even know what happened there. So once again he asked young Boom to tell him everything, because he would help as much as he could, because he is his leader. The young Boom was quiet for a while, but a little later he asked our protagonist if he could come to him right now. After a few seconds, we see our protagonist standing right in front of his school and remembering the words of young Boom, who told him that although nothing happened, there was still some misunderstanding at school. Our hero asked him again, as if he was curious. He said that it was not important at the moment, so he just said that the diffuser was in one of the cabinets in the teacher's room. Our hero was already standing in front of the cabinet, and he could only think that it was his time. He brought the diffuser to young Boom and asked if it was the one he wanted, but he took off his mask and said that he did not know what he needed it for. But he thought that he had nothing else to do, so he will go home now. Young Boom said that our protagonist had done a great job, and he even thought that our protagonist was more useful than he had thought before. He might even be more useful than the bouncer. A young Boom lifted the diffuser and saw that something strange was right under the diffuser. We can understand that it must be some kind of beacon, because one of the teachers had already rushed in his car and said that he was almost there, because he had almost arrived at the very address where the beacon was located. He knew that it was the same maniac who liked to peek would want to steal his diffuser back. The young Boom could not find a place, but the teacher was already getting close to the place while our hero was quietly walking away. Our hero was smiling, because before the diffuser was taken away, he had managed to give the teacher the same beacon. He knew that it would be hard for the teacher to believe what he said about young Boom being a bastard, so that's why he gave it to her. At that moment, he asked her to leave the tracker right on the diffuser and then take it to the restroom. That's when the teacher would be able to see young Boom's reaction. The teacher did so, and at one point when he told young Boom that his diffuser had been taken away to follow him, the teacher watched intently as young Boom made his way into the women's bathroom to check his hidden camera. So the male teacher who had just come up to her asked what she was doing. The teacher was very concentrated, so she asked him to check the closet, or rather the diffuser, which was there. We understand that it was on the tip of the teacher as well as our protagonist that they were able to go straight to the young Boom. The man at the wheel was talking to a colleague and said that the beacon was going in a different direction from him just as the teacher had told him. The young boom was in some alley, where he started to break the diffuser with his foot in order to get the memory card on which he had recorded everything he had seen and the evidence of his guilt. It took him a long time to find the memory card which had broken his camera, but when he found it, he was immediately spotted by his teacher. The teacher ran at him saying that he should have stopped. The young boom ran away and couldn't understand how things had turned out this way. But the words of the teacher who was chasing him made him think that now he should just run away. If he could not get away from him, he would surely end up dead. After running away from his teacher, young boom decided to hide in the parking lot, but the young boom was 1 meter away from the teacher. Young boom couldn't understand why it was just because of one memory card. He decided that he should break it, because the most important thing he should do now is to break it. After all, by cleaning everything on it, he can prove his innocence. Breaking the map, young boom heard that the teacher didn't want to leave and kept calling him, but the teacher promised him that he would give him another chance. If at the end of the count to 3 seconds our protagonist is going to be let go, then the teacher will give him extenuating circumstances. The teacher started counting to 3. Young boom didn't want to come out, even when the count reached 3. The teacher got mad because he didn't want to obey him. The teacher was smart, so he did something he didn't expect. He started calling all the voice assistants to make some sounds. The young boom immediately started to take out his phone to mute the notifications and the sound in general. But as you might expect, he did not have time. One of the voice assistants was still answering, so in exactly a few seconds, the teacher was looming over our hero. At that moment, the young boom still felt the very sexual crime he had committed, and also the fear that he could be imprisoned in Korea for this. But we don't see what's going on with the young boom, because we see our hero talking to his sister who is wondering where they should start. Our protagonist did not answer her because he saw a big man running towards him. He came up to our protagonist and said that he was a traitor and would die today at the hands of the big man. We didn't get to see the fight with the big guy, but we got to see what happened to the young boom who was caught by the teacher. The teacher climbed on top of the car and saw the kid. He said he had dealt with someone as strange as him more than 10 years ago, but there was nothing he could do about it. It was over. The young boom had decided to run away, and all he could think about was that these days were just a bit unlucky for him, because whatever he did, it was getting worse and worse. Without even a hope for change, we are once again transported to the situation between the bouncer and our hero, where the bouncer threatened his opponent in the rain. The bouncer said that he didn't even care if our hero was hiding something. Our protagonist was smiling because he was surprised that the big man was able to find out everything much faster than he had expected. And our hero expected that the bouncer would remain a complete idiot in his eyes. The bouncer didn't like our hero's words, so he immediately flew at him with his fists. Our protagonist dodged a fist and wanted to hit the big man, but he was able to dodge him. The big man said that he would not let that happen, but our hero was ready for that, so he punched him. But the big man was not ready for that in his turn. That blow was followed by the big guy lying on the ground. Our hero asked him if such an idiot as he thought that our protagonist would hit the same place twice. But the big man said that he would do everything to kill our hero today, if he was so brave. The big man got up from his knees and understood that in order to win, he must calm down. So he told our hero that everyone can rule his anger from where he comes from, because only thanks to this rule he can win. After these words, Hermione began to try to hit our protagonist, but he failed again. Our hero blocked the shot and jumped away. Then he asked the big man, why did he become the right hand of young Boo? Everything he does as a right hand is just the usual dirty work. The bouncer in turn remembered that he had done everything for his mother, who was sick, but he had started to work for him to get money. But our hero did not even listen to his story because he did not care. He just threw his cap right in his face. Chang-Su was distracted, so our protagonist was able to throw her down again, starting to mock him, saying that he should be more careful because it's raining outside. Chang-Su saw that our hero took off his hoodie, so it was clear that the bully was in this position simply because he lowered his guard. Our protagonist began to strangle the bouncer, and also remembered the words of his old teacher, who taught him the technique of strangling with a hoodie. Our hero remembered that even though it was similar to the others, it was still different. Our protagonist continued strangling the bouncer until he almost died. Our hero let his guard down a little, because he thought that he would not kill the man. But judging by the fact that the bouncer felt a little free, he immediately began to kick. Our protagonist continued strangling him, thinking that he could not allow his conscience to speak inside him. Our hero strangled him, saying that he thanked him for everything, so that he would make sure that the bouncer would leave life completely. It was at that moment that the bouncer remembered a scene he had seen when he was a boy. He remembered that he had once been told that crocodiles were just like reptiles, but that they were at the top of the food chain among predators. But the bouncer was defeated. Our protagonist had managed to defeat the giant, which he had shown to his sister on the phone. But he did ask his sister to come to him, because they would have to finish what they wanted to finish. We can see that the young boom had grabbed his teacher's leg. He caught him and said he would never let him leave. The young boom was trying his best to get out of this situation, so he even kicked his foot in the teacher's face. He started to kick his teacher, saying to let him go. He continued to hit, also saying that teachers should only teach and not ruin other people's lives. The young boom hit his teacher so many times in the face that he fell on the ground and was covered in blood. Young boom even thought he was dead. Young boom had already run away from the scene of the crime because he saw the police start to arrive at the scene. When he went outside, he realized once again that whatever he did, his situation was getting worse and worse. He looked at his phone and wanted to call Chonsu, but he didn't answer. He couldn't figure out what was going on because he couldn't understand what young boom was telling him to do. But he came up to the young boom and asked him what he was doing. What happened to him anyway? That's not what young boom asked. He asked, why is our hero standing there right next to him? But our protagonist couldn't understand what he was talking about because the young boom was right in front of his own building. But the young boom holding his head couldn't remember why he came there. He had some plans. The young boom thought that our hero was the only person he could trust right now. He also said there was no one else around, and if he does, he'll definitely pay him back. But he was very pleased with himself, because that's where he would take the young boom. He would definitely help him. After a short pause, he said to himself that they would now go to hell. Young boom, while he was being led, couldn't understand why they didn't go to the office, but to the street. But our protagonist didn't want to wait long, so he went behind the young boom's back and said that he had some things to talk to the young boom. The young boom couldn't understand what kind of situation he was in right now. A young boom woke up coughing on the edge. He touched his neck and could not understand where he was and who had brought him there. He looked down, but immediately collapsed. He realized he was in a swimming pool. He screamed and asked for help because he couldn't even swim. He decided to walk across the pool floor to reach the ladder, but when he looked at his feet, he saw that they were covered with blood. He didn't understand where it had come from, but when he examined the floor of the pool, he saw that there were many sharp things. He immediately went to the surface and wondered why there were so many of them, but later he noticed our hero who was sitting on a chair. He wondered how he had dared to do that to him. But our protagonist did not raise his head and asked young boom if he knew and remembered the story of the Little Mermaid. The story from the book about the very princess who only wanted a pair of legs. But our hero realized that he didn't understand anything, so he decided to remind him by starting to drain the water from the pool. He also started to tell his story about an incident. We can see that some tournament is going on, so our protagonist's sister won first place in the competition. Everyone said that she had a talent for it, because no one could imagine that she would be able to achieve such a result in such a short time. Our hero said that his sister was a great person, even though she lost her legs, but she didn't give up and kept at it. His sister had become so famous that so many people wanted to talk to her. However, despite everything, it was not only her talent, but also her appearance. Even so, he respected his sister and was proud of her. We see that one day the mother of our protagonist asked them to sit down because they already had to hurry. That very day there was a court hearing, where it was discussed that our hero's sister had been intentionally wounded. But the judge said that it was true, but the defendant said that it was just an accident, because something had not worked on him. They say that even though he was involved in the accident, the fact that he was a minor and Yongboom didn't even have a driver's license makes it impossible to comply with his sister's request to put him in jail. Our protagonist, however, realized that the air that filled the courtroom reeked of the injustice that had permeated the whole place. However, even Yongboom's family was shocked, because they simply had no idea that their son could have done such a thing. They couldn't even imagine such a thing, because they saw their son as quiet and calm. They asked for proof of Yongboom's guilt, but it seemed like Yongboom's family couldn't provide any proof. It was because even the car looked like it wouldn't even start. The judge kept reading everything and saw one very important thing. He saw that there had been many attempts to reach an agreement. Our hero was very worried, because he was waiting for the judge's verdict. But the only thing that the judge did was to say that he would soon pronounce his verdict. But after a short pause, the verdict was that Yongboom only needs to do 180 hours of volunteer work instead of punishment. We are now transported to our protagonist's house, where his sister was weeping profoundly because she knew that his punishment was unfair. That's what her family thought. Even though her brother called her to come in and open the door, she was looking at a new internet post that said that she was not the victim but Yong-boom. It said that our hero's sister wanted him to have coitus with her. We also found out that the whole fight between our protagonist's sister and Yong-boom was recorded, so that his beating was also shown on the net. At that point, our hero's sister's house immediately became a gateway for reporters. Immediately, there were a lot of haters of our protagonist's sister. She became a scapegoat for all people. Our hero even thought that every action of his sister was like stepping on thorns, because everything she did caused her great pain. She understood that everything would go on even if she cried and asked people to stop. But our protagonist's sister could not do anything. She could not say a word. We are transported a bit to the future, where our hero runs and calls his sister, who is standing on the roof of the house. He asks to pick up the receiver, but at that moment there was no one in the chair. Our protagonist's sister had jumped off, or rather had finally decided to jump. Our hero again wonders if anyone remembers the fairy tale of the little mermaid who just wanted to be loved while living underwater. He did clarify that there were a few peculiarities, that the protagonist was a good person and a person with a pure heart, but she still had her voice taken away. So as a result, she simply could not speak the truth. But the saddest part was that the story had a bad ending. During his story, his sister fell on the car behind our protagonist. Our hero could not believe his eyes, but everything was clear from the telephone with a picture of his family in the background. Our protagonist was sorry, for his sister was a person like others, but she had ended her life as a high school student. Our hero asked Yong-boom what did he think of that. Doesn't he remember it? If not, he decides to remind him of everything, starting with the pool and ending with the tape. Our protagonist stepped with his booted feet on the pool floor, so it didn't hurt at all. Yong-boom didn't know what he was talking about, but our hero didn't want to think anything. He hit him with the words that if he couldn't remember even with the help of clues, he should be punished. He pressed Yong-boom right against the spikes, saying that he had always wished that he would get into an accident right into the bushes with the spikes. Yong-boom was very hurt. There were many rivets on his body. He couldn't understand why our protagonist was doing this to him. And did he even know him? What does he want with him? Immediately, Lee Yoon-sung started saying that he was the same brother as Lee Na-hyun, in case his much-respected friend hadn't already understood. Of course, Yong-bum still couldn't figure out if this was the weakling in front of him, and did he know that this was all illegal? Of course, to all the words of Yong-boom, our hero just took and threw more buttons on his back. Yong-bum was writhing in pain, but our protagonist started hitting him again and again. He said that they would have a lot of time together. But how did Yong-bum have such confidence in himself? Is there really the same car that hit our protagonist's sister on the street? Yong-boom started to mumble something, but our character just took out the keys and asked once again, how does Yong-boom have the nerve to ride it in the first place? Were she and her sister just bugs to him? Sure enough, Yong-bum started asking what was going on. Did he really deserve all this? He didn't set fire to his house or kill his sister, it was just because he was slow. However, it was at this moment that our Lee Yoon-sung was very happy. He threw another punch and said that he hadn't changed at all, and he was still the same trash as before. Still the same egoist, it was an incredible relief. So he started repeating the same name, his sister's name, so that he can finally remember that he took her voice and everything else. Of course, Yong-bum didn't look well at that point. His eyes were rolling back in his head, and he barely looked at our character, so our hero told him that he would give him one last chance. Yong-bum immediately noticed this, so he asked Yong-bum to offer a sincere apology. Yong-bum, however, immediately began to laugh and say that our hero should go to another place with such requests, because he is just a loser and is proud of it. Why would a person like Yong-bum even have to apologize to him? How stupid would you even have to be to ask for such a thing? How on earth was he going to apologize to his sister if she was burning in hell? However, it was at this moment that the bastard said that he couldn't afford it at all, and Jang-soo appeared behind our protagonist. Yong-bum asked where he was, because he couldn't get through to him. He asked for help to kill our hero. But even so, Jang-soo just did what he was supposed to do, just slapped his former boss in the face, sending him flying away. But we could see that Jang-soo was crying at that moment, because he remembered our protagonist's words that Yong-bum lying to him all the time. He knew that everyone knew that his mom needed an emergency operation, but it was Yanbu who deliberately delayed it and neglected his mom's condition. They made it clear to him that the same femoral hernia could be cured in a very short time, but now everything is complicated. Of course, if Jiangsu sues, then the probability of winning is less than 1%. And even if he tries to spread everything on the internet, then all the videos will be blocked and the end will come not only to him, but also to his mother, so it will definitely be difficult. But there was one decision. What would Yongbum's right-hand man do anyway? Of course, Yangsu was just angry at his boss, because he knew that he was being cheated, that his mother was sick because of Yongbum, so he decided to make his boss suffer too. Of course, Jiangsu knew that it was illegal, but he still doesn't understand anything about it because he's just stupid, and he's going to lose in court because Yongbum has too much money, and Jiangsu, so he'll do what he knows how to do. Or rather, he will use his own hands, so Yongbum should know that he will definitely make ends meet today, since the only way to get revenge in Korea is to use his fists. Jiangsu was once again reminded of the same moments when Yongbum had assured him of the complexity of the operation, that it would be better if his mother was just hospitalized. Jiangsu was very upset at the time, because now everything will be much more expensive, but Yongbum assured him that there was no need to worry, because he would do anything for his mother. He asked not to worry about money, and in return asked him to run a couple of errands for him. It was at this moment that Jiangsu put as much of his feelings into each of his strikes as possible. After all, he had entrusted the same bastard with his mother's life. He knew that from Lee Yun-sung's words, his mother would now spend the rest of her life in the same ward, because Yongbum's goal was to miss the time for the operation and keep Jiangsu at home. Jiangsu was sure to hold his mom hostage so that he couldn't leave, even though it might have ended in a simple operation, but he continued to bully her. Yongbum wanted to say something, but Jiangsu kept beating him until our hero came over and asked him to stop, because if Jiangsu continues, he will definitely not be able to pay his mother's sick bills. Sure enough, Jiangsu immediately looked at the body of his former boss and understood that the latter considered him not just a friend or a person who could be trusted, but also a mentor. But as he expected, even if you know a person, you can't read a person's mind. No wonder Jiangsu will never trust the people of Joseon again. So he immediately asked Yongbum to transfer money to his account to cover his mother's expenses. Of course, Yongbum couldn't figure out how everyone found out about this, so our protagonist immediately reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, saying that Yongbum was probably looking for exactly what he had in his hands, or rather the thing that was on the 6th floor in the box that he was looking for. He always closed it. Of course, Yongbum couldn't have known how he did it, how he found it, but our hero only said that he learned about it from his close friend. Most likely, it was an external storage device that contained absolutely everything, and this was what could be called Cho Yongbum's ledger, in which all his secrets were stored. Of course, Yongbum didn't know if they knew his password or not, but our protagonist immediately began his offensive again, saying that he didn't work so hard to get in for nothing, because of course he got all his people, and his goal was to get into Yongbum. Just there was this hard drive, now everything was exactly there. Of course. He had nothing left. At the same time, Yongbum started crying and saying the name of our protagonist's sister, saying that he had sinned, that he was now asking for forgiveness when it was too late. He was saying that he would spend his whole life in prison, but he would remember her for the rest of his life. It was at this point that the bastard noticed that his car keys were lying at the feet of our main character, so he immediately ran to them and ran to the car. He said that he would do anything to gain an advantage. He was sure that nothing would help. He definitely wouldn't redeem himself. As soon as he got in the car, Lee Yun-sung asked him to get out, because all he had to do was apologize to him and his sister that there wouldn't be a second chance. But the only thing Yongbum did was make a gesture that wasn't very nice. He was sure that there was no point in apologizing. So he immediately pressed the pedal to the floor. While he was driving in the car, he understood that our hero only made a big deal out of a molehill, that the statute of limitations for his revenge had long expired. But while he was driving, he decided to tell about everything on the internet. As he drove, he noticed that there were a lot of curbs ahead of him. He tried to stop, but his brakes failed. Of course, the little sister of our main character asked him at this moment if everything is fine, because she keeps the perimeter under control. No one will enter there. Who is N Boom? And also asked if he even apologized. But our Lee Yoon-sung was thinking of something else. He remembered the saying that if you make other people shed tears, then you have to be prepared to cry tears of blood. However, if you are not ready, then you should not start. It was at this point that Yong-boom's car fell into the abyss, but it was now that his sister could sleep in peace because he was done with everything. It is at this point that we can notice a lot of people walking down the street. They noticed a certain stroller that was in the middle of the road, and then a certain person in a suit. By then, we can see that our protagonist's little sister came to Yong-boom's parents' house, telling them about what their son was doing. He stole personal data, attacked minors, illegally filmed them, drove without a license. In addition, he violated medical laws by using his grandfather's hospital. Of course, the girl said that if they turned it all over to the police, they would all get a huge amount of damage, so she asked them to solve everything as quickly as possible. Yong-boom's father, holding Yong-boom's mother in his arms, asked if he was being threatened right now. But the girl at the same time said that they do not understand who they are dealing with, because she also had a photo of the man sitting with the judge, so this can be counted as a settlement deposit. Of course, the man understood what they wanted him to do, and then we can see that Yong-boom is also in an awkward position, because his entire central nervous system on the left side of his body is damaged, as is his spinal cord. Of course, Tom is very lucky to survive, but you will have to put up with this state for life. Yeon-bum also realized that he wouldn't be able to walk for the rest of his life, so he started yelling at his parents that he wanted to be alone. Bye, Yeon-boom. As he screamed, 2 tall men came in and immediately lifted him out of the bunk. My parents only understood that it was all because of a conversation with that girl, or rather the sister of our character. She said that their son should be taken to a mental institution, because this is all much preferable to prison, or something similar to it. The nurse didn't want to complicate things, so she decided to hint to them that if the case was made public, the hospital would suffer, then the school, the judge, and eventually the building they own. If it came out, there would be a lot more work to do too, so all she did was hand out a consent form for hospitalization, along with a few other things that needed to be said. She said it was the family's consent, and a discharge agreement would only be possible if the person giving the initial consent agreed. If his consent isn't given, then Yong-bum won't be able to leave the hospital. My sister asked me to accept their decision, because only there will their son be able to become normal. Anacho also sent a text message to his brother saying that his parents were finished. All the pictures and memories flashed through our protagonist's mind. And then he put on his helmet and realized that it was time to come to the next bastard, who was probably called an icon of the younger generation. And he worked as an actor. His name was Kang Joon-hyuk. He is the owner of a beautiful face and a sly smile, an actor who is gaining popularity. There are even a lot of rumors that he had problems with women. But thanks to the acting skills that he began to hone from childhood and a strong fan base, he now works in the entertainment industry without any problems. Of course, the person who asked the question stalled a bit, because the question was, what kind of school days did their young actor Jun Hyuk have? Jun Hyuk immediately asked the same question to the reporter. The journalist started to get more nervous. He couldn't understand what was going on. But Jun Hyuk was getting better and more aggressive. So as soon as our actor said that he graduated from high school smoothly, he started calling his manager, saying that he couldn't understand why he was being given such interviews, even though he was living such an incredible acting life. Of course, our Lee Yoon-sung heard all these noises because he was also standing behind the building and knew that it was very difficult for him to hide his character. As soon as he entered the building, he handed one of the people a piece of paper, saying that he was just a delivery guy. Our character understood that if there was a problem, you would think about it, even if it was small. But Jun Hyuk has definitely lived a simple life. He can come up with an excuse, and the problem will disappear. Of course, Jun Hyuk had already asked to go home, but the same person said that one of the fans brought him a package. It was a premise that should make it clear that it was all because of Jun Hyuk, because that was the meaning of the third tattoo. As soon as Jun Hyuk said that he needed to quickly respond to the callous fan, he was told that it wasn't for him, but for Shin Min-woo, the reporter. Of course, the reporter was shocked. Everyone was shocked, because fans even sent a gift through the fast service. So we decided to take a break. As soon as Jun Hyuk asked what was in there, he was sent by express delivery. The reporter didn't know what to say, so Jun Hyuk snatched the photo out at the same time and saw 3 people there, where there was a very similar person to Shin Min-woo. The reporter immediately changed his face. He said that no one was allowed to tell about this photo if Jun Hyuk wants to save his acting life. We, on the other hand, understand that a person like him was definitely on a completely different level than Yong-bum. He was still more solid than him, because when he reached the peak, it was our protagonist who would wait for him there, only to drag him straight to hell. By then, of course, the break was over, so not only Shin Mina, but Jin Hyuk was also asked to return to the interview. Immediately, the reporter began to say that he would like to go back to school, but is he really crazy? Of course, everyone knew that Shin Min-woo was crazy. It was he who first began to mock our hero, and all the others began to mock him after his example. Did Lee Yoon-sung do something to him? But our hero only said that the most common reason for violence in school is just for fun. Absolutely everything they did was for no reason. And 4 years ago at Sanggung High School, it all started. At one point, as soon as our main character went there to school, she noticed Shin Min-woo himself. Of course, there were rumors that he was a bully, so our protagonist was constantly in fear with him. Of course, he tried his best to avoid such guys, but because of his frequent stomach pains, he deliberately lured hooligans to himself, so this was the reason. At one point, Shin Min-woo asked our hero to switch places for a moment, although it was strange, but Shin Min-woo, a person with whom our protagonist did not even know personally, seemed like a friend. He thought it was all an accident, but in the end, it turned out that Lee Yoon-sung had become their target, the target of the hooligans. Of course, due to the fact that at that moment our hero could not go to the toilet normally, his stomach continued to make sounds. Shin Min-woo said at the time that he wanted to get some sleep, so he asked our main character to cover him with his body. Although our main protagonist agreed to this, he definitely couldn't stand it, but he couldn't stand it in the next lesson either, so he still had to go to the toilet. While Lee Yoon-sung was sitting on the toilet, he noticed that there were a lot of people standing outside his toilet door. It was Shin Min-woo, who knew how to tie someone into an outcast, which was why Shin Min-woo was laughing and enjoying every second of his target being turned into an outcast. Of course, everyone was wondering why he did this, but the bully only said that he didn't have a reason to do it, because our protagonist just looked stupid and an easy target. He smelled like weakness. So Shin Min-woo asked other people to do something to our protagonist, just take it and eat it his. By the time they were done, our protagonist knew that this was where it all started. The gates to hell had opened, and he had to endure every day. Of course, it was possible to accept that Shin Min-woo was a more vicious scumbag than Jo Young-bum, but who even sent him all this? All of this made him, Shin Min, uneasy, especially since there was no sign of the delivery guy. Of course, only our hero understood that Shin Min would pay in a different way than Young-bum, because the plan was thought out to the smallest detail. Our hero would definitely crush him and take everything that he has. Our protagonist will definitely not hold back. He immediately reached out to the window that he smashed with his rebar and took out Shin Min-woo, who was immediately beaten up. By this point, all the memories that Lee Yoon-sung had started to flash through his mind were that he was only chosen because he wanted to be. But even if he was chosen as the target, he was told that there was nothing he could do about it. How is Shin Min-woo going to get out of this situation now? He tried to do something to our protagonist, but still received blow after blow. As soon as his manager came out to his friend, we can see that the reporter was just angry, because there was nothing he could do. At this point, Shin Min-woo was in the hospital, and he had a lot of reporters asking him what had happened. Was it someone he didn't know? He was even sure that he would definitely find this person. As soon as the reporters gathered, a very formidable person entered the room and asked to make some space for them. It was Yu's company, P. Director Ye Won-dong. He immediately asked to remove all journalists from the ward. Of course, his director understood that everything was quite difficult, but interesting. Shin Min-woo wanted to go all out. He definitely wanted to find the bastard who did this to him. But his director asked him not to worry because one of the people is now looking for any information, surveillance cameras, background checks, and the cops. Everyone was sure that the person who did this to Shin Min-woo would now definitely be dead. Our main character had already taken off his clothes, which were covered in blood, and started looking at his third tattoo, knowing that Shin Min Woo would definitely not be able to do anything, because our protagonist would return what was asked of him for what it is. The internet just exploded with this news, but the director asked not to dwell on it all. You just had to think about your recovery, because they now have a good scenario that he was attacked, saving his manager. His employee definitely became an excellent victim. At one point, Shin Min Woo's people found our main character's motorcycle. They thought that he should be nearby, but just at that moment, Lee Yoon-sung appeared in front of them with his bat. Everyone immediately started telling him to come over to them while the director at the hospital was making arrangements for a new role. The director immediately approached his employee and said that there was an uproar, so most likely everything turned out well. But Shin Min Woo had a feeling that something had definitely gone wrong. His director told Shin Min Woo that he should take good care of his body, while they both heard that someone was sneaking into the hospital. The headmaster didn't think much of it until the door opened and they both noticed the masked man. They asked him who he was, but our main character just said that he's an old friend of Shin Min Woo's. Of course, the director wanted to leave, but Shin Min Woo, out of fear, asked him to wait. He remembered that once they were 18 years old, they wouldn't be allowed to bully people, so he finally asked them to have fun with Lee Yoon-sung, and they wanted to make it an incredibly memorable year for him. Of course, our character knew that his old friend was supposed to be acting in a drama, so that's why he came. But Shin Min Woo couldn't understand why he showed up. Everyone should have known that Shin Min Woo was now facing the person he was asked about when he was a child. But what could Shin Min Woo do in front of the public now? Was Shin Min Woo now incapable of anything? It was now that the door to hell opened before him. The headmaster was also confused, as Shin Min Woo didn't have any friends since school age. The director should have been angry. He was about to raise his hand against our protagonist, but Shin Min Woo stopped him, asking them to make up two of them. The director was shocked that Shin Min Woo also had a past, but it was definitely starting to bore someone. There was a lot of news on the internet about this situation with the reporter. Everyone asked him about his condition, because what happened in general. Many people were waiting for him from the hospital. Everyone understood that either he was annoyed or just holding back his emotions. As soon as Shin Min got in the car, we could see that he was very offended. Everyone asked him not to go alone. He was told that many people are afraid of revenge, because they are even afraid of their own shadow, so they asked not to worry. But as soon as they both got home, they noticed that our character trashed Shin Min's house and said that it was quite cozy, that Shin Min even had such a famous girlfriend, that it was cool to be famous, that he was always ready to change for the sake of such a life. Shin Min knew that he couldn't hold on anymore, but our character came up to Tom and asked him to calm down and make his face look simpler, because if anyone saw him in this state, they might think that he was the victim there, and also immediately said goodbye and reminded him that they were friends, right? That Lee Yoon-sung would definitely show up at his house again. Shin Min already knew exactly what our protagonist wanted and why he did it. He was just trying to provoke him, wanted to bring out the old him, but he is not interested in forgiveness and will not accept an apology for anything. We can see Lee Yoon-sung getting beaten up again, while Shin Min is talking to Yong-bum about how to attract older women. Our hero already understood by that time who really started the chain of reactions. It was with Shin Min that it all started. Of course, as soon as our protagonist was in the hospital, Shin Min came to him and told him to forgive him, even though Shin Min doesn't think he did anything wrong, but he decided that it was necessary to apologize to him. Of course, our main character understood that apologies are a basic precaution for future celebrities, but it was he who advised everyone to start these bullying of our character. It is all his fault. Our main character was even speechless, and his mother was watching the scene. Of course, Shin Min thought that it would take a lot of people to deal with the whole situation, just like the Bai Kotoro biker gang, whose motto is loyalty. Of course, Shin Min always called them when he needed something. Once the call was over, Shin Min was confident that the gang would be able to handle everything. Of course, he decided to respond to the provocation, but the gang believed that they would succeed without problems. As soon as the bikers met our protagonist, they decided to laugh at him, as before. His little sister knew that he might not be able to handle such a large number of people, but Lee Yoon-sung was sure that it would work out. After all, this was the reason why he had scheduled a fight against the bandits in the alley, where you couldn't leave your back exposed, but there was still another reason. It was because that they wouldn't be able to escape from there. because while everyone thought they could take down our protagonist, then Jiangsu appeared, who understood that both good and bad deeds were not forgotten in his homeland. So that's why he came to help and also show real loyalty. And first, he will kill all the enemies that stood in his way. At this point, our protagonist remembered his lessons with his teacher. He was told that fighting against a large number is too dangerous. He can't even teach him anything. But there is one more thing you need to know if he wants to avenge his mother. So he said that you should never do everything alone. You need at least one person who can be trusted, and also never forget about your goal. Never get distracted and not be afraid. Our Lee Yoon-sung did so. He understood that now he didn't need anyone's protection. He could provide it for himself. Of course, Shin Min was waiting for an answer at this time, but he got a call from SEO, so he knew he had to go. Shin Min immediately went up to his friend and asked, did he tell his director that he called his friends? Of course, his friend told the director, which he confessed, which really upset Shin Min, because he probably forgot who Shin Min really is. At this point, our protagonist continued to deal with all his opponents, who continued to strike such blows that people could not get up, but Jiangsu simply took them with one hand and immediately threw them to the side. Of course, Jiangsu said that he was surprised when our hero asked him for help, but reminded that people like him, who were from Sakhalin, simply could not forget all the good deeds that were done to them. He even said that Tom would not need to pay. At that moment, Lee Yoon-sung remembered the scene when they brought money for his sister's life to their house, and Jiangsu said that he didn't need the money, so our protagonist just turned around and said that if he didn't need it, he could just throw it away. By this point, Shin Min had already beaten up his assistant, saying that they went to the same school with his former best friend. He knew about it, and also that his hands would definitely not get dirty because of this situation. As soon as he was done with it, he immediately left for his car. As soon as he approached her, he was met by two people who were the same actor's people. They thought they might steal his car. Until Shin Min showed that bastard's face, he knew he wasn't to be trifled with, so he had to mess around while his boss tried to call him. As soon as the boss heard that his employee picked up the phone, he immediately couldn't understand why he took so long to pick up the phone. Where is he? And also, where is his actor? Shin Min immediately said that he wants to get out of the role of an actor and celebrity, because he just can't. The director started to say something, but our Shin Min only said that Tom would have to put up with his temper, or else he would tell the press everything and they would go down together. The director didn't understand anything, so the bastard Shin Min had to tell him that he just needed to be cleaned up, and that he was going to show a bad side, and then he started to hang up the phone, putting his own director in front of the fact. Of course, as soon as Shin Min sensed that things weren't going according to his plan, he decided to call his old friend and send our protagonist straight to hell. Of course, his friend was shocked by the call, but Shin Min Lee-sung said that Lee Yoon-sung would now take revenge on them, so the reporter decided to gather all his old friends to get even with their old friend as early as possible. Of course, we can understand that after his father's death, his entire family was plunged into mourning, especially his mother. She almost went crazy, because they not only lost their house in a fire, but also their beloved sister and daughter. It was understandable, though, since it would have been strange if she hadn't gone mad. Our protagonist's mother immediately went to Shin Min, trying to prove something and also make him apologize. But he only laughed, because really such an old woman is going to file a lawsuit against him. Of course, he confessed that it was him, one of the people who burned down their house and also pushed her daughter to die. But can this old lady do anything without proof? Of course, our protagonist's mother thought that it was all Shin Min's fault. So after seeing that this boy apologized to our hero, and seeing how upset Lee Yoon-sung was, she thought that it was Shin Min the main character. But at the same time, the boy said that it was Shin Min the main character. He would blame the woman because she had somehow found out his number. It was all a lie, but so convincing that the mother believed it. She was afraid that she would lose even more, because the boy in front of her said that it was all their fault. She kept hearing that she didn't even have proof, so the only thing she did was just go down on her knees and say that she was probably crazy, but Shin Min kept telling her that it was all her fault. By this point, we can once again see the conversation between Shin Min and his friend, that they are the ones to blame for all of this. His friend said that this was exactly what he wanted to be known for, and now all he had to do was get down on his knees and beg for mercy like a fool, and then just hung up. Shin-min realized that his acquaintances didn't make any sense, and then he thought about the guys he sent after Lee Yoon-sung. As soon as he started calling them, they didn't answer their phones, so he knew they weren't enough either. Now he began to think, what should he do now? So which method will be most useful for him? After all, very soon he will be acting in a movie, and a lot of offers are coming to him, so what should he choose? After all, his promotion is right in front of him. He realized that it is better to come to our main character and start crying. He will apologize to him. He realized that this is the best way to stay alive. He started saying that he deeply apologizes for everything he did to our character, and that he doesn't even have 10 mouths to say everything he did. Our Lee Yoon-sung, on the other hand, couldn't believe that a person like Shin-min was apologizing to him right now, even kneeling down, so our protagonist asked him to get up. Shin-min started saying thank you for the fact that our protagonist forgave him, but our character made it very clear that nothing would happen because who said that he forgave him? It was at this moment that Shin-min's arm was broken. Doesn't someone like Shin-min see that Lee Yoon-sung is not a fool? This act cannot be forgiven by an apology alone. Once again, we flash back to the past, where we see Yong-boom and Shin-min himself discussing what they can do with our hero's mother. Yong-boom first. He offered to send them money, but it was Shin-min who told them to teach them a good lesson. After all, if you look at the mother of our main character, they realized that she is very stupid. She believes every word they say. As soon as they were done, Shin-min reminded her that he had taken her phone and installed a special app that they would use to take all the money from the bank from her. Of course it did. At one point, the woman still lost all her money. Even the police said that there were not real bank accounts, the owners of which could not be traced. Of course, she was very upset about this incident, so she told our character everything. So did Shin-min really think that he would make do with just an apology? After all, he had ruined Lee Yoon-sung's life, even though he thought he had done nothing. But the truth was, he was the one who tricked his mother. So our hero started to double down on Shin-min's arm, making him scream harder. And then he said that he wouldn't say it twice, and yet he said that he definitely didn't come for an apology. He came for revenge. Does he really think that our character will believe his words? Now Shin-min will definitely have a dark time in his life. While Shin-min was screaming in pain on the floor, still on his knees and begging to be forgiven because he had already suffered so much, he even said that he would spend the rest of his life apologizing. But of course, our hero was blinded by his power. He liked this apology more than he would be punished in court. But all of them who did something bad to him had to do it, so if our Lee Yoon-sung didn't do all this, they definitely wouldn't apologize, they sat in silence. But at one point, our protagonist said that all he needed was a sincere apology, as well as actions. Our hero turned to Shin-min and said that now all he has to do is visit his sister's grave every year, and he will continue his life as a celebrity. Of course, Shin-min was shouting that he would follow exactly the instructions, thanking his savior on his knees while our protagonist just walked away. Sure enough, the next day Shin-min showed up at one of the companies, where he signed a contract that now he is the main character in the movie, called Revenge Time. It was he who was talked about as a hero, because he wore that very wound like a real hero. He has reached his peak, the best time of his life. Now life is open to him, a full jackpot. He kept talking about it, and his director kept producing it. Of course, the life of such a celebrity was not so beautiful inside. He worked for the director, just like a goose that lays golden eggs. However, as soon as the director smiled broadly, he asked if Shin-min had checked all the documents. Shin-min was clearly sure that everything was fine. After all, he had checked everything several times, and was there any problem? The director immediately said that all the things about his new roles had to be checked. It was written that if Party B has a conflict that stops the work of production, then Party A can file a lawsuit. Of course, he remembered this conversation with one of the people from the company, saying that this contract should be signed. Shin-min understood that Lee Yoon-sung had given him his forgiveness, so it wouldn't be a big deal if he signed this contract. However, the words that if there was any problem, the director would be interested to think about what would happen. The director said that if such a famous person immediately breaks the contract, it will be problematic, and you can get a fine that costs 3 contracts. So the director asked if Shin-min had solved his problems with the friend who came to see him. It would definitely be bad if he didn't make up his mind about it, but Shin-min was sure that everything would be fine. He was sure of it. Shinmin wanted to think that it was time to change the agency, but the director only said that it was time to invite his guests. It was at this moment that Anna and our main character entered the building. Now is the time to tell and interview him about how he bullied Lee Yoon-sung as a child. It was at this point that the words that our character would bring Shinmin down from his peak rang in Shinmin's head. Of course, the director said that he was kind of sure that he had decided everything. So why is he shaking so much now? Does he even have the money to pay the penalty for breaking the contract? Can he even answer all the questions honestly now? Of course, the director said that there is nothing wrong with this. The company will pay this fine itself. It will be about 2.5 billion won, so Tom should not be afraid of problems. Shinmin knew that he had hit the mark, but the director was happy that they could continue to work together. In front of our eyes, our Lee Yoon-sung came to the director's office and couldn't understand what would happen if all of Shinmin's bullying was shown to the public. After all, he's just a kid who's finished filming a drama for a movie. However, our hero said that he must first suffer, or he will not be able to live in peace. If he doesn't get hurt, then his career will go downhill. Of course, the director realized that our character was already up to something, so the director immediately left the table and said that he had a counteroffer. What he wanted to say was that after our hero did what they wanted, Shinmin's life would still be ruined, so the director wants to help. He wanted to say that our main protagonist's goal is just to get his revenge, but the director's goal is to get Shinmin to do everything for him, so if they join forces, Shinmin's life will turn into a living hell. Sure enough, Shinmin immediately started making a big fuss. He couldn't believe that the director was trying to force him to pay the fine. But the director did not pay attention to his words. He only cared that he was doing all this in front of the reporter. It was at this moment that Shinmin was slapped in the face. He was asked if he thought that being famous was so easy. They immediately took him by the ears and started saying that now he is not a person, but a product that will make them a lot of money, and will also work until he gives all the money. Of course, our Lee Yoon-sung understood that Shinmin was just a product whose price skyrocketed, which meant that the company would want to use it as much as possible. At this point, we are reminded again of a conversation between Lee Yoon-sung and Anna, where our protagonist said that such companies like this idea, because they always choose the lesser evil than the greater. He's even sure that the director will make Shinmin work until his last breath. Of course, Shinmin himself understood all this after 3 whole days. He almost did not sleep and thought only about jumping out of the car and stopping working. Just run away somewhere. However, it was at this moment that driver Shinmina told him to focus, because they had arrived at the last place, where only VIPs come, so all they had to do was behave. It was at this point that Shinmin realized that this job depends only on the mood of people, as well as on dishonest contracts that are full of lies and benefit only one of the parties. But no one can deny or reject them, because everyone thinks that if they don't sign him, they won't be able to make their debut. This is the reason agencies use to force them to sign their contracts. It is because of these reasons that people continue to work like slaves, thinking only that there is only one thing against them, their own agency, so you cannot betray them. Shinmin at that time could not understand where it was located, because the entire interior that was around it cost about several 100 million rubles. He had already heard of places where housewives enjoyed playing with celebrities. He wondered if it was true. However, just at that moment, a woman named Hong Yura, who was 73 years old, walked into the room. She immediately snuggled up to Shinmin and said that it would be over very quickly, and it was like Shinmin's first time in this position. Of course, Shinmin felt that he couldn't just leave it like this. He would definitely take revenge on our protagonist as well as his director. While he was thinking about this, other men came in at the same time, saying that they had heard that a new person had been brought to them. So who was the new face? Of course, before us were the VIP butterflies of this institution, a type of entertainment, who immediately said that Tom should not be afraid of them. They will be gentle. By this point, the director was just smiling, and he knew that this was the best way to get weak because you were a celebrity. And now he would start to understand what it meant to deal with the wrong people. At the same time, the director asked if his assistant knew why he decided to group up with that child. He just said that it doesn't matter how much you mess up the celebrity, because it all depends on how you manage it with the business. They decide whether its value will go up or not. But why did he insist on sending Shin Min to the butterflies? It's because he hasn't given up on Shin Min yet. Of course, it's difficult to make a celebrity out of an ordinary person, because they don't keep their mouths shut. So there are two choices. Either kill or try to control such a person in the same way as the director did. Shin Min has already started to look terrible after a while. He can't even count how much time has passed since he had a proper rest. How long has he been living this hellish life? At this point, we can notice that our Shin Min is already at a new show where a large number of people are gathered. By then, the person who was hosting the show noticed Shin Min himself, who looked unhappy. The bully asked to turn off the camera and then approached the unfortunate participant and asked if he was really laughing at him, why he was not concentrating on his work at all, why he was spoiling everyone's mood. However, it was Shin Min who understood that he wanted to destroy everything that he had been building for so long. Because if not for the fine, everything would have turned out well, in a different way. However, as soon as he looked at his phone, he noticed that his bank account had increased again. He understood that the more he worked, the more profit he made. He realized that if he continued to work, he would earn an incredible amount of money, so all he had to do was push harder. At this point, Shin Min's manager received a call from Yu Won-dong, who asked if he was with Shin Min's manager, and if so, what condition was he in. The manager immediately said that he seemed to be giving up, but as expected, because of receiving the money, he began to understand the reality, so now he is definitely under their control. By that time, all the heads were sitting in the bathhouse, where they were now thinking about a plan to get rid of that very bastard more easily. What was their plan? But the goon also said that if everything is done according to the laws of Korea, then the most important element in the law is that the murder they want to arrange must be planned. The minimum sentence for this is 10 years, but they still found another way. Our protagonist also understood that they wanted to kill him, and he told Anna about it. He said that the head of the same company was a former mobster, because you can learn about this from his past. Anna couldn't believe it, because why hadn't they bothered him yet? However, Lee Yoon-sung knew that if he touched Shin Min, he would definitely have to meet with the boss of the company. But all Anna said was that they should not forget about their agreement, but also pack their things and move to another place of residence. Of course, our hero understood that everyone helps him, not because of the agreement, but because of what is happening to our character, so he must keep his agreement. At this moment, our Lee Yoon-sung was walking on a pedestrian crosswalk. He thought that nothing mattered, no matter what he would encounter. However, it was at this point that people from the agency said that there are exceptions for people who have some physical disabilities, or accidentally kill someone. It is thanks to this that they will be able to get rid of the problems that they accidentally have. However, the main reason why this happens is drunk driving. As soon as the words were spoken, our main character noticed that a car was rushing at him. But our protagonist only thought that it was just a failure that befell him at that moment. His whole life flashed before his face, or rather the faces of people who were worried about him. A certain person who looked like a homeless person started laughing, but people immediately arrived, shouting that they needed a doctor because the person had just almost died. The doctors immediately arrived in their car and took them to the hospital. However, from the doctor's conversation, we can understand that it was she who suffered and not our hero. We, in turn, can see that two cars collided at that moment, and Anna was sitting in one of them. Our character could only hear that people were running to her, and memories of Anna offering to help him, offering to go to her place and spend time together, and picking him up would pop up in front of him. However, as Lee Yoon-sung ran to the car as fast as he could, he noticed that it was in a very bad state. He immediately burst into tears and then accompanied her to the hospital. As soon as he sat down to think about what had happened, his girlfriend sat down next to him, who knew that this was going to happen sooner or later, but did not think that it would happen so soon. Our main character said that it was true because everything happened much faster than they thought. By that time, the headmaster was furious because he couldn't believe that his servant couldn't fulfill even one request, or rather, deal with the child. He said that the biggest problem wasn't the accident where the person was drunk, but that everyone realized that it was them who did everything. Of course, our character immediately got knocked up by Yang-soo, who was very angry about Anna's condition. They wanted to stop him, but he was sure that the easiest way would be to just go and kill those people Going to jail at the same time, he was sure that the case should be completed. Our Lee Yoon-sung was also sure that everything that was going on now should be resolved, and also said that Jang-soo was right, because now they would definitely have to change their approach to the whole situation, so he asked them to proceed with Plan B. Now they will use everything they have. He just asked me to listen carefully. As soon as he said it, both of them were shocked. Is he really going to do all the things he said? Will it be all right? However, our main character only said that they asked for it. You just need to prepare. He immediately picked up the phone and called some people who had been distracted by the call. As soon as one of the people picked up the phone, he was afraid that our protagonist was calling him. It was Choi Kyung-min, a master and expert in stealing bank accounts. At the same time, our character told him that he would need to take out the garbage in such a way that no one would be able to find out anything. That's how this video ends. If you have sat through to the end, please don't forget to press the subscribe button and leave feedback. See you in the next video.